Chapter 1449. He could not leave the construction of his personal wizard's pagoda to someone else. Otherwise, if the location of the wizard's pagoda was leaked, Grimm's powerful enemies would come to his doorstep. Thus, Grimm could only hand the task to Sock, who would be in charge of the construction of the wizard's pagoda. However, the environment in the fire elemental plane was too harsh, and normal life forms could not survive there. Thus, most of the work of building the wizard's pagoda could only be done by the engineering magical machinery. However, in order to adapt to the harsh environment in the fire elemental plane, the engineering magical machinery had to undergo special modifications to increase their resistance to fire. Furthermore, with Grimm's status as a level 5 Great Wizard, a normal small or medium-sized wizard's pagoda would not be able to unleash his full power. Thus, it was only natural that this would be a large private wizard's pagoda. After handing the dimensional waymark to Sock, Grimm hesitated for a moment before finally deciding to pay a visit to the great wizard Salubo. It was time to settle the grudge between him and the Salubo family. A quarter of an hour later, Grimm appeared in front of a wizard's pagoda in the Isorda camp. The entrance to the first floor was crowded with wizards in all kinds of robes and armors. Even though they were of different levels and occupations, they all wore a strange metal badge on their chests. Every time they passed through the protective barrier, the badge would glow with a blue light, as if it was some sort of identification mechanism. 2 adamantine magic statues, each 7 meters tall, stood silently on either side of the wizard's pagoda's gate. In the center of their humanoid skulls, there were honeycomb-like holes with magical gems of various sizes embedded in them, constantly scanning the wizards entering and exiting the wizard's pagoda. It could be imagined that if someone were to barge into the wizard's pagoda with a strange badge or without a badge, these 2 level 4 golden golems would use their indestructible bodies and ferocious fists to give the intruder an unforgettable memory. The adamantine magic statues were large metal puppets. Their insides were made of super magical alloy, and their exterior was coated with a layer of adamantine. They could defend against all types of elemental wizard spells below level 4. Even if they were hit by a level 4 wizard's attack, they would only take half of the damage. Such powerful metal puppets were basically invincible against magi below grade 4. Even a grade 4 magus would have a huge headache if they encountered them. Although the 2 adamantine golems were only at grade 4, they were much more powerful than the shadow fiend that Grimm had left for Mary. To put it bluntly, even 2 Tier 4 intermediate shadow fiends working together could not defeat a Tier 4 basic fine gold golem. There was no other reason. It was just a different division of labor. This large golem with thick skin and powerful magic immunity was the natural enemy of spellcasters. And assassin-type golems like the Shadow Fiend that focused on agility were no match for it. However, in terms of stealth and sneak attacks, the Shadow Demon was more powerful than the adamantine golems. At least, a caster like Grimm was more afraid of golems like the Shadow Fiend, but he was not worried about the adamantine golems. The main reason was that the adamantine golems were too large and cumbersome, and could not be used in many places. Hence, the adamantine golems could only be used as guards for important wizard facilities. It was difficult to bring them along at all times. As soon as Grimm approached the door of the wizard's pagoda, the beehive-like magic compound eyes in the middle of the 2 adamantine golems' heads locked onto his position. "Halt! Outsider, please report your identity." The adamantine golem on the left stepped forward and blocked Grimm's path. A low, mechanical voice came from its body. The adamantine golem's actions immediately attracted the attention of the magi present. When their gazes fell on Grimm, they all trembled, their faces filled with shock and fear. "It's the legendary fire wizard. It's him. It's him." At that moment, the consciousness of the adamantine golem fluctuated, and a low, hoarse voice suddenly came out. "It really is you, Grimm. Alright, you can come in. I'll wait for you in Hall 9. Judging from the voice, it was the level 5 wizard signs that Yang Ling had met once before. As a magus, almost all of them had a photographic memory and were able to recognize something just by hearing it. If there was a need, some magi would even etch an especially important scene deep into their sea of consciousness, so that they could repeatedly savor and appreciate it from time to time. This was one of the many benefits of a wizard with powerful mental strength. The adamantine golems took heavy steps to make way for Yang Ling, and the light barrier on the door of the wizard's pagoda opened. Grimm looked around at the crowd and calmly walked in. As soon as he entered the hall, a group of wizards ran towards him in a panic. The one leading them was someone familiar to Grimm, the level 4 wizard Martin, whom he had some dealings with. Behind him was a group of high-level wizards draped in the robes of the law enforcers. Grimm. Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm here on the orders of Sir Signs to guide you. Even after 200 years, Martin was still as tall and handsome as ever. However, meeting an old friend suddenly, and the other party had become the Sir he was referring to, made him feel awkward and at a loss. Thank you, Signs. Grimm smiled faintly. If that's the case, let's talk as we walk. Yes. Ignoring the level 2 and 3 enforcers of the wizard's pagoda, Grimm followed Martin's lead and walked into the spacious and bright wizard's pagoda. You've been guarding the wizard's pagoda all these years? Why didn't you go back to the central continent to take a look? Grimm asked curiously. I can't go back and I don't want to go back. Martin sighed. People like me aren't good at running things, and I can't be bothered to socialize with those people in the scattered towers. Thus, I decided to hide in this camp outside the region where no one can control me, and I've been living a carefree life. Then your family and kin, don't look down on me just because I'm young. I'm actually over 700 years old. The only bloodline descendant left in the scattered pagoda forest was also severed 300 years ago. Although the remaining branch families all use my name, if we were to really examine them, they don't have much of a bloodline relationship with me. At this point, Martin could not help but sigh. I can't be bothered with them. I'll just let them fend for themselves there. What about the others in the tower? They're similar to me. Some of them have lost their bloodline, some of them have conflicts with the few in the scattered towers, and some of them are infatuated with the quietness here. Although the situation is different, after being out for so long, they really don't have the mood to return to that narrow space. Grimm nodded when he heard this. It seemed like he could understand their difficulties. However, we know everything that you've done in the scattered pagoda forest. We sincerely admire you for being able to break the shackles of the scattered towers in just 100 years, allowing them to return to the path of a wizard. At the end of his speech, Martin could not help but add, You're indeed the great revolutionary that the central continent has been waiting for. From today onwards, the central continent will rise. Grimm did not comment on Martin's compliments and continued to talk peacefully with him. After passing through countless corridors and riding on a metal floating disc, they finally arrived at the Witchcraft Hall 9. Signs had been waiting there for a long time. It was the same dirty and strange robe, the same messy black and white hair, the same skinny old man with the strange red nose. Signs stood there silently, looking at Grimm with a calm expression. As a great wizard, he naturally had thousands of methods to make himself younger and more handsome. However, these external methods were difficult to hide from other wizards of the same strength. Moreover, as a great wizard, their value was never reflected in their figure or appearance. Thus, many great wizards did not care too much about their appearance and became maverick. But today, after seeing Grimm with his own eyes, Signs could not help but feel a little envious. It's good to be young. Compared to Signs's maturity, Grimm was indeed young to the point that it was somewhat hateful. At first glance, Grimm was just a delicate-looking youth. His eyes were as bright as stars, and his mouth was straight and square. His appearance could not be considered handsome. However, his body was unexpectedly strong, and the proportions of his body were even more perfect. He stood there quietly, giving off an ordinary feeling. It was as if he did not have the suffocating pressure that other powerful wizards had. However, when Sign's gaze fell on Grimm's body, he could not help but feel a trace of shock. As a grade 4 wizard, Martin might not be able to see the law aura radiating from Grimm's body, but as a great wizard who had been promoted for 1900 years, he could clearly see it. 4 law halos. This newly promoted Grimm actually had 4 law halos surrounding his body. 2 crimson flame halos resonated with Grimm's soul, most likely the law of fire that he had grasped himself. There were also 2 halos, one dark red and one bright yellow. They seemed to have been enchanted by some powerful treasure. The 4 special law halos revolved around Grimm, protecting him tightly. Even Sign's expression changed a little when he saw the fluctuation of the laws that it emitted. Grimm had grasped 2 types of law right after his promotion, which was enough to show how outstanding Grimm's fire talent was. Aside from his astonishing strength, this young great wizard also had powerful treasures on him. This was what confused Signs the most. Where did he get so many grade 5 items? Could he be the illegitimate child of some great figure in the wizard faction? Chapter 1450. After taking their seats in the hall, Signs could not help but ask, "Speak, why are you looking for me?" "I want to meet the great Magus Cerubo." Since Signs had asked, Grimm naturally went straight to the point. As if he had already expected this, the skinny old man couldn't help but sneer sinisterly. "Lord Cerubo is different from us. He has long left the camp and has his own secret plane. I'm afraid it won't be easy to contact him. But you will definitely be able to contact him, won't you?" Grimm chuckled. Signs sized Grimm up and down and finally could not help but sigh again. "I didn't expect Lord Cerubo to make such a mistake. Otherwise, how could he have let such an outstanding person like you slip away from his hands?" "That's not really the case. It's just that there were some misunderstandings and conflicts in the early years, so I want to use this opportunity to reconcile." "Kakik. Those small matters that happen in the plane are not worth your time. You've just become a great magus, so you can't understand the thoughts of the big shots. For people like us, the so-called strength is the power that we can truly control. As for the magus world, Kiki, under the repulsion of the damned magus will, there aren't many things we can interfere with." "But the magus world is the origin plane of the Magi, isn't it?" Yes. You're right. But you can't be so naive as to think that the entire Magus faction relies on the Magus world to produce a great Magus every few hundred years to support the consumption of the planar wars, right? You have to know that our Magus faction is constantly fighting against the gods, dragons, demons, and beholders. The main plane of the sorcerer world alone cannot support it in any way. So, the high-ranked Magi have control over some of the planes that are comparable to the Magus world. It is the constant output of these planes that ensures that the Magus faction always has the power to intimidate their enemies. Grimm listened quietly. Now that he had reached Tier 4, his life dimension had changed. He now had the qualifications to come into contact with these true secret. Listening to Sign's gossip, Grimm could feel that the curtain that blocked the truth of the world was slowly being pulled back. A new world that was completely different from what he had known in the past was emerging. Every grade 5 great sorcerer who leaves the planar world will stay in the Outland camp for a long time. Why? On the one hand, he had nowhere to go and was not qualified to build his own sorcerer's secret mirror. On the other hand, I'm also adapting to a new body, a new soul, and at the same time adapting to my new knowledge. I know that for you to be able to reach the 5th level at such a young age, you must have experienced bloodshed and cruel planar wars. But now that you've become a grand warlock, the way you view the world, planes, and resources will be different from before. I'm afraid that most of the planes you've conquered and experienced in the past were small to medium-sized planes. The native creatures there are either stupid and slow, or they have great power but no ability to match it. Therefore, when you fight against such an enemy, even if they gather an army that is hundreds or thousands of times larger, in your eyes, they are just a bunch of weak lambs. Give you time and space. Even if you are at an absolute disadvantage and in a dangerous situation, you have the confidence to drag them down and drag them to death. Why? What gives you such strength and confidence? Listening to Sains's questions, Grimm pondered. Advantage in planes. Rank advantage. Knowledge advantage. That's right, it's these things that give you enough confidence. In your eyes, the other party is a flock of lambs. Although some of them had grown horns and claws, they still couldn't change their nature as lambs. And we are the wolves. They are the prey, and we are the predators. This is not decided by us, but by the difference between the planes. You can imagine that if their world is stronger than ours, they will definitely not let go of this opportunity to plunder resources and population. The sorcerer world is just a large primary plane. If we want to become a super-large plane like the Abyss Realm or the Calamity Plane, the resources needed are simply too much. And in this process, the enemies we face will no longer be weaker than us like in the past. What the great sorcerers face are usually the large-scale planes that are comparable to the sorcerer world. And the wars between large-scale planes are not something that the small-scale wars you've experienced in the past can compare to. So, the foreign camp is a novice camp for rank 5 magi who have just stepped out of a plane to gather resources and familiarize themselves with the environment of large-scale wars. In the eyes of those high-ranking magi, we are just a bunch of newbies who have just come of age and have yet to sharpen our claws and killing skills. Grimm's body trembled slightly, a strange and complicated expression appearing on his face. That Magus Signs continued to laugh strangely as he continued to tell him these cruel truths that he had never thought of before. Don't be discouraged. Almost every newly advanced rank 5 Magus has to go through a period of mental and physical adaptation. Inside the plane, you are the strongest person in the world and your words are final. But here, you are still just a recruit with a bit of strength. But don't be depressed. At least compared to those low-ranking magi, we are still the backbone of the camp. Those high-ranking magi will not let us go so easily. After listening to this heart-wrenching description, Grimm took a deep breath and could not help but ask curiously, "Sir Signs, why did you tell me so much valuable information?" I just want to tell you that the internal conflicts you see in the planar plane are nothing but a fart in the eyes of a rank 6 great sorcerer. He is always busy fighting with those large-scale planes, so where would he have the time and energy to worry about those *T matters within the plane? Grimm thought for a moment and asked, "Since the conquest of planes is so dangerous, are there any great magi who do not like wars and do not participate in them?" Of course there are. Didn't you see the dozen or so grade 5 experts lying on the ground in the camp? They don't leave the main gate every day and only stay in the camp to collect resources. They don't have any jobs and spend all day doing their own research and experiment. Then, will those high-ranking magi force them to participate in the planar wars? That won't happen. After all, every Magus has their own strengths and preferences, and there is no way to force them to do anything. However, for those magi who are good at killing and conquering, taking the initiative to participate in the planar wars organized by high-ranking magi is perhaps the fastest way to strengthen themselves. Let's take this Exodar camp as an example. The true owner is the rank 7 Magus Erevold, and he chose to join Lady Barbara's team. Currently, they are mainly fighting with the Orc God, and I heard that it is quite intense. You mean, only those rank 8 magi have the right to declare war on a large-scale organization, and he will then gather some great magi to form the main force of the war? Grimm asked. That's right. Signs nodded and said, the so-called large-scale planar wars are not limited to 1 or 2 planes, but rather a vast and terrifying war that involves tens or even hundreds of planes. In order to deal the greatest blow to the enemy, all wars will start from the outer planes, using a tidal wave of attacks to destroy the enemy's resource planes, war planes, and faith planes. When that time comes, the little fellows outside will be cannon fodder, while we will be the core of the war. We will either use them to destroy the walls of the planes that we have not been able to conquer for a long time, or we will use them to offset the enemy's strength. So, you can imagine millions or even tens of millions of ants killing each other inside the plane. Outside the plane, more than 10 rank 5 magi will be fighting against the orc god's subordinates or clones. That scene will definitely be unforgettable for the rest of your life. Grim muttered to himself for a long time, and finally shook his head with a bitter smile. Sir, it seems that you have a motive for telling me so much. It's good that you understand. Signs grinned. Lady Barbara's side is extremely tense, and she is still lacking in manpower. As such, all sorts of recruitment orders have been sent to the various camps. You can choose to participate or not, and you will still enjoy absolute freedom. However, before you refuse, I hope that you can take a look at the conditions of the recruitment. Having said this, Signs took out a communication crystal and tossed it to Grim. Grim caught it and slowly probed it with his spiritual force. In the next second, with the help of the AI chip, a large amount of data was easily extracted from it. Beast Slaying Campaign. Magus Recruitment Order Targets. Great Magi of Rank 5 and 6. Mission Details. Ensure the smooth progress of the Western Front. Mission Initiator. Great Magus Arivald Mission Rewards. 2 small resource planes, 1,000 Scythes of Origin Substance, 1 Rank 5 Material, optional, 30,000 slaves from another world, and all spoils of war obtained during the war will belong to the individual. Apart from the extremely simple mission conditions, there was also a description of the progress of the beast slaying campaign. The Great Magi recruitment this time was voluntary. The Great Magi who were recruited were mainly in charge of following Great Magus Arivald to the Western Front, destroying all planes that worshipped the Orc god along the way. Chapter 1451. Seeing this familiar content, a strange expression appeared on Grim's face. After a long while, he looked at Signs with a smile that did not seem like a smile, and said softly, "The last compulsory recruitment mission was also issued by you. That mission is still fresh in my memory. Now, you're recommending a similar mission to me. It seems like we're really fated." Signs laughed as well. It is indeed fated. However, I gave that mission to Fred, who knew that he would push you out to make up the numbers. If not for that opportunity, I'm afraid you wouldn't have become a great magus so smoothly. It seems like it's really a coincidence. Then Sir and Fred, it's nothing. He just wants to use me to get a share of the camp's trade, so he'll give me a regular tribute. Then wouldn't I be ruining your plans? It's just some low-grade resources. Do you think a fellow who hides in a plane and doesn't even dare to participate in a large-scale planar war would have anything good? Signs laughed as he explained. He did ask me for help before, but I rejected him. Why? So, most great magi who leave the Magus world are unwilling to participate in the internal struggles of the plane. Once they do, they'll trigger a backlash from the plane's consciousness. If the plane's consciousness messes with me and lowers my compatibility with laws, then wouldn't I lose more than I gain? Especially someone like you who's favored by the plane's consciousness, no one would dare to touch you. I don't think so. Grim seemed to have thought of something and said, I was attacked by a great Magus clone in the plane. His name seems to be Douglas. Douglas? Signs asked in surprise. Douglas of the Silver Alliance. I don't know which side he belongs to, but from the signs, he's indeed very close to the people of the Silver Alliance. Grim hesitated for a moment. Then it's him. Signs sighed. Douglas, a fellow who became a great magus 1,200 years ago. He's already at rank 6 now, and has long since left the Exodar camp. It said. At this point, Signs raised his head and stole a glance at Grim. He then said in a low voice, "It's said that he's with a certain witch and has the intention of leaving the Silver Alliance. That's why he had no choice but to leave the camp to avoid trouble. Of course, these are all rumors." Witches. Avoiding calamity, Grimm furrowed his brows. He had a feeling that these two incidents were somehow related to him. However, he had never studied the art of divination, so he was unable to deduce some of the secrets behind these clues. Seeing that Grimm was deep in thought, Signs did not rush him. Instead, he picked up a book of witchcraft and silently flipped through it. After a long time, Grimm finally raised his head and asked, "If I'm interested in this recruitment mission, who should I contact?" "Just let me know and I'll help you contact them." "Then Lord Cerubo, you don't have to worry about that. I can guarantee that Lord Cerubo won't punish you for such a small matter. Moreover, if you participate in the mission, you might even meet Lord Cerubo there." Having obtained the information he wanted, Grimm did not delay any further. After bidding farewell to Signs, he immediately returned to Steel City. Of course, Grimm wouldn't believe anything that Signs said. Thus, he instructed the heterotopic brain, Gaz Ravi, to inquire about information related to this recruitment mission. The heterotopic brain, Gaz Ravi, had been stationed in Exedar's camp for more than 200 years and had his own channels and channels. Not only that, but it had heard that there was not only one enlistment mission, but 5. This meant that the Magus faction was currently fighting against the 5 factions, and they had obviously spread the recruitment orders to all the places where Magi gathered. Any Magus who was interested in these missions or wanted to sharpen their willpower at the juncture of life and death could take the initiative to participate in these expeditions. The rewards for these missions were also very generous. At the very least, it was much better than staying in the camp and waiting to die. From this point of view, Signs' recommendation of the recruitment missions could not be considered a scheme. All the mission descriptions were more or less the same. Some were to attack the Demon Eye Empire, some were to wage war against the Abyss Realm, some were to attack the Dragon Plane. In short, manpower was needed everywhere, and armies were being prepared for war. It was completely different from the leisurely and relaxed sorcerer life that Grimm had imagined. Grimm hesitated for a long time, but in the end, he could not suppress his curiosity about the large-scale planar war and contacted Signs. After receiving Grimm's confirmation, Signs was overjoyed. Grimm couldn't help but wonder if Signs would also receive some benefits as a referrer. However, Grimm didn't pursue these minor details and instead focused on arranging the affairs of the camp. The construction of the Magus Tower in the Fire Elemental Plane was handed over to Sok. With the waymark that Grimm had left behind, as well as the assistance of the Rank 4 Dragonweb Spider Queen Lakebess, the construction of the tower would not be disturbed by other fire elemental creatures. The only problem now was to produce a batch of engineering magic equipment that could withstand the intense flames of the fire elemental plane, as well as to purchase a large amount of stone and spell formation materials for the tower. These things could not be rushed, and could only be gathered step by step. According to the AI chip's estimates, it would take at least 5 or 6 years to complete the Wizard's Tower. During this period of time, Grimm had nothing to do in the camp. It might not be a bad thing to take the opportunity to experience the large-scale planar war that Signs had mentioned. After all, this kind of recruitment mission was not compulsory. If Grimm did not have a good time there, he could just return at any time. He would not have to worry about being sent to the most dangerous place like last time. This was the main reason why Grimm was willing to accept the recruitment mission. Of course, the generous rewards were also a secondary factor. Even though resources, planes, origin, substance, slaves, even though these things were rare, as long as one was patient enough to collect them, they would definitely be rewarded. However, things like level 5 materials were difficult to find in the camps outside the planar war. Grimm had been lucky enough to obtain some level 5 materials from the previous planar war. At that time, He did not think that they were rare or precious. However, when he came to the Exodar camp and explored the market, he was shocked to find that there was no market for level 5 materials. No one would take them out to trade. Even if there were occasional transactions, they were conducted by the great sorcerers through bartering, trading resources in private. The level 5 materials that Grimm had previously obtained included a portion of the multi-headed snake lizard's body, as well as the remains and soul of the multi-armed giant. Apart from the law crystal and magic core that he could use, the rest were precious but could only be stored in the fire dimension for the time being. Of course, if Grimm could find a master puppeteer, he might be able to turn the multi-armed giant that had lost its heart and all its blood into a terrifying level 5 wizard beast. This way, Grimm would have another tier 5 helper. However, it was a pity that the strongest puppet master in the Exodar camp was only level 4. Such a fellow obviously did not have the ability to deal with such precious level 5 materials. He would rather wait than waste them. Left with no choice, Grimm could only let the materials gather dust in the warehouse. The multi-armed giant's law crystal was an earth elemental law of the earth. It was not suitable for Grimm to absorb and fuse with it, so he could only keep it in his hands to see if he could exchange it for a fire elemental one. As for the multi-armed giant's magic core and the extracted soul, he could create a level 5 magic puppet. However, if he wanted to forge it successfully, he still needed some relatively rare level 5 materials, and these things just happened to be very difficult to find from the market. Hence, Grimm placed his hopes on the reward of the level 5 materials for the recruitment mission. It had to be said that once Magi were mobilized, their efficiency was rather high. On the 6th day after Grimm agreed to the recruitment mission, Theros informed him that he was leaving. This was a huge rock castle floating in the depths of the starry sky. Its size was comparable to the main continent of a small plain, and those who could set foot on it were all powerful sorcerers or elite sorcerer legions from all over the sorcerer faction. However, at this moment, on an open-air teleportation platform on the 73rd floor of the giant rock castle, the white light that represented an ultra-long distance teleportation began to dissipate, revealing a tall young man. "You must be Great Magus Grimm from the Exodar camp. Please report to Lord Ironwald at the 7th Battle Hall." Guarding the teleportation formation was a strange magus with the head of a bird and the body of a human. It was only a rank 3, but the power in its body was different from any magus Grimm had seen before. Grimm stood still for a moment. After the slight discomfort from the ultra-long distance teleportation, he finally had the opportunity to look at the scenery around him. Above his head was a pitch-black night sky full of stars. A huge and magnificent energy barrier enveloped the entire giant rock castle, isolating it from the scouring of the mana tide outside. It also made the environment a lot gentler. Though the mana winds here were not as tyrannical as those in the outside world, the terrifying energy radiation was not something normal beings could withstand. According to the AI chip's calculations, creatures that could move freely here had to be at least a high-grade rank 2. Chapter 1452. After leaving the platform and passing through a half-suspended stone path, Grimm reached a wooden door that led to the interior of the giant rock castle. In front of the wooden door, 2 shield sword golems stood side by side, quietly standing there. Sensing Grimm's approach, a thin red ray shot out from the black hole in the middle of the 2 golems' heads and hit Grimm's body. Beep. Detected a detection spell. Do you want to counteract it? No need. Grimm stood there calmly as the red ray swept across his body. Immediately after, the 2 golems moved to the left and right, and a strange mechanical sound came from their bodies. Test pass. Please enter. Behind the door was a long stone path that was 3 meters wide and 5 meters tall. It extended to the left and right, and along the way, there were wooden doors that were arranged in a disorderly manner. As soon as Grimm stepped through the wooden door, a young female magus who had been waiting hurriedly bowed and said in a crisp voice, "Welcome, Lord Grimm." Grimm's dark red eyes swept across and instantly saw through the magus in front of him. Grade 3. Elemental. Wind element, however, although she had the appearance of a female human, her internal structure was completely different from that of a normal human. Her appearance also had the strong smell of a modified spell. Humanoid. Secondary plane. Foreign magus. A string of mysterious words floated in Grimm's mind, and he seemed to understand a little. The young female magus shivered under Grimm's cold gaze. She could sense that in just a short moment, all of her secrets had been seen through by this mysterious great sorcerer in front of her. The huge difference in rank made her like a little white rabbit in front of a tiger or a wolf. She could only rely on her strong willpower to resist the instinctive fear and cowering in her soul. Fortunately, Grimm's AI chip could only scan her for a moment, or else the spiritual pressure and energy radiation would have caused real damage to her soul. "Please follow me, my lord. You've just arrived, so you need to greet Wizard Gleason, who is in charge of recruitment." This young female magus was obviously well trained. Even though her body was still shivering, the smile on her face was still as sweet as ever. "Gleason?" Grimm hesitated. "It's a grade 6 great sorcerer. He's in charge of receiving sorcerers like you who are summoned. Moreover, he's also in charge of the subsequent assignments." When she said the last sentence, the young witch's tone became heavier, as if she was reminding him of something. Grimm nodded and said nothing more. The two of them quickly shuttled through the twists and turns of the stone passageways within Giant Rock Castle. Along the way, they passed by many elite magi who were on guard. However, after seeing the young female magus leading Grimm, the elite magi looked at Grimm with respect and envy. Walking all the way, he passed through the outer security corridor and once again stepped onto a 2-li-long stone path in the air. This stone path was the only passage connecting the inner and outer areas of the castle. Therefore, the number of warning runes and detection runes on it was staggering. Grimm strolled on the stone path, and even had the time to admire the spectacular scenery around him. This was a path suspended in the air. The large and deep space was filled with stone platforms floating in the air. Every platform was a few li wide, and they were packed with all sorts of powerful and ferocious wizard beasts and war golems. In the darkness they stood silently. Even the most ferocious wizard beasts maintained their silence. Only their eyes, which were open, emitted a scarlet and ferocious red light. At a glance, the entire space, from top to bottom, left to right, seemed to have become a sea of red. There were no weaklings among those who could establish a foothold here. The AI chip was able to estimate the basic strength of the wizard beasts and war golems just by looking at the energy emitted by them. Most of them were grade 1 or 2 magic creatures, with a small number of grade 3 ones making up about 10% of the total. This number might not sound impressive at first, but considering the hundreds of thousands of people at the scene, 10% of it was already very terrifying. "Are these cannon fodder for the war?" Grimm asked curiously. "No, they're Lord Ironwald's personal army. The real cannon fodder are stationed in the other rock castles. They're mainly vassal legions and foreign armies from various secondary planes. Their numbers are also 100 times greater than here." The young female magus replied delicately. Although she did not speak in detail, the information revealed in her words was enough to shake Grimm's heart. In Grimm's previous understanding, a so-called plane expedition was to send vanguard troops to infiltrate a plane and establish a small outpost camp, which would then be used as a base to attract reinforcements. The method of controlling a plane was mainly through cooperation and infiltration. The main point was to gather the original rulers of the plane into their hands, and then use the original ruling order to control the entire plane. Occasionally, when they had surplus troops, they could launch a large-scale invasion of the plane and fight with the natives of the plane with real swords and spears. If they won, they would obtain the resources and population of a world. If they lost, they would return to their lair to lick their wounds and prepare for the next invasion. However, most of these experiences were against low-level planes that were weaker than the Magus world. If they were facing a plane that was on par with the Magus world, how would they fight a war? Even Grimm could not figure out how to carry out an invasion. But now that he had caught a glimpse of it, Grimm could faintly sense that the depth, scope, and intensity of a true large-scale planar war had far exceeded his expectations. Even he was a little anxious about what a war would be like. In a small or medium-sized plane war, the existence of a Grade 5 Magus was already a terrifying force that could determine the outcome. In a large-scale plane war, a Grade 5 Magus like him was only a small part of a huge war machine. Although he looked noble, the role he could play was not as great as imagined. At the very least, it was not decisive. After passing through the suspended road and several tightly guarded checkpoints, Grimm followed the young female Magus into the inner area. The flow of people here was obviously much higher than in the outer area. The spacious and bright hall was bustling with people. They were either elemental spellcasters wearing sorcerer robes and holding staffs, or tall and muscular anatomy refinement sorcerers wearing sword armor, or summoners with contracted beasts on their shoulders, or bloodline sorcerers with a strong bloodline aura on their bodies. The large hall was packed with people, shoulders rubbing against each other. It was so lively that it was surprising. However, when Grimm looked around, he saw that less than half of the magi were humans. The rest were magi of other races with strange appearances or eye-catching symbols of their races. There were also many who had concealed their figures, making it difficult to distinguish their gender and race. Even the weakest Magus here was a Grade 3 Magus, and the proportion of Grade 4 Magi was quite high. However, with Grimm's appearance, the bustling crowd in the hall suddenly fell silent. Everyone who saw the young female Magus and Grimm behind her could not help but be surprised. They hurriedly hid to the sides of the road, making space in the middle. "It's the Great Magus! There's a Great Magus! Be careful not to offend the Lord!" Behind his back, the whispers never stopped. "My lord, please follow me." The young female Magus leading the way proudly raised her head and led Grimm through the crowd. They passed through the hall and turned into a stone staircase that spiraled upwards. Only when Grimm disappeared from sight did the hall resume its flow, as if a pause button had been pressed. However, many Tier 3 and Tier 4 sorcerers who had personally witnessed Grimm's feat could not help but gather together and discuss the matter. "Is that a new lord? I've never seen him before. He looks unfamiliar." "Yeah, I've never seen him in the Crystal Hall before. He should have just arrived today. He looks like he came from the main plane." "That's right, Senazar. Didn't you come from the main plane as well? You've never seen this lord before?" The one being questioned was a tall woman who was hidden in a blurry purple mist. The purple fog was thin and could only isolate her aura, but it could not completely conceal her figure. Looking at her appearance, figure, and bearing, she was the Grade 3 Magus who had disappeared from the scattered towers for a long time, Senazar. Hearing the questions from her companions, Senazar, whose aura surged and was on the verge of breaking through to Grade 4, had an awkward and conflicted expression on her face. After being questioned by the others, she gritted her teeth and said angrily, "I don't know him. There are so many Grade 4 monsters in the continent, I know a few. Don't ask." After saying all this, she ignored the stunned gazes of her companions and turned to rush towards the direction of her residence. As she ran, her heart trembled, and her face covered in purple fog looked even more perplexed. At that moment, Grimm's immense spiritual force had enveloped the entire area. Although she was hiding behind her companions, she did not have the confidence to hide from his spiritual senses. He had already advanced to a Great Magus. He had already advanced to a Great Magus. He had already advanced to a Great Magus. This heavy piece of information kept circling in her mind, causing her to be panic-stricken and at a loss as to what to do. She had originally thought that by struggling on the line between life and death and desperately honing her abilities, she would be able to stand on equal footing with Grimm the moment she advanced to grade 4. Who would have thought that Grimm had already taken an even more crucial step, leaving her even further behind? Chapter 1453. He actually met some acquaintances here. Grimm could not help but sigh inwardly at the wonders of fate. However, before he could finish lamenting, the scene before him made his heart throb. What appeared in front of Grimm was a large and spacious crystal hall with many high-grade wizards gathered inside. When Grimm stepped into the hall, everyone's gazes turned to him, and waves of spiritual pressure pressed down on him, causing the expression of the young magus beside him to change. Grimm's expression changed slightly. He took a step forward, shielding the young witch behind him as he coldly faced the overwhelming mental pressure that bombarded them. Without hesitation, Grimm's overflowing spiritual force formed a silver shield of light in front of him. At the same time, the 4 law halos in his body manifested, transforming into 4 strange runes that shone on the shield of light. Asterisk bang, asterisk there was no loud explosion, no ear-piercing rumble. The earth-shattering collision occurred on the invisible and intangible spiritual plane. Grimm's expression stiffened, and his body trembled slightly as his feet sank into the crystal floor. Inside the hall, more than 30 great magi grinned foolishly. Some of the more impatient ones could not help but mutter, "Fall, fall. Hurry up and fall." Grimm's body trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. His consciousness also went numb, and he had no idea where he was. However, the 4 colored law runes on the shield of light began to circulate wildly, devouring the waves of spiritual force. This was the only reason Grimm's mental defense did not crumble. If Grimm was really a great magus who had just advanced to Tier 5, he would have fallen to the ground in a daze. However, the powerful protection of laws coupled with the tenacious spiritual barrier made it so that his spiritual defense was not the least bit weaker than those old magi who had been around for 1,000 years. Therefore, Grimm only swayed a few times before he withstood the impact of the mental shockwave and stood firmly on the spot. However, the violent spiritual force had nowhere to vent, so it was channeled into the ground, causing the crystal floor within a dozen meters of him to crack. His feet also sank into the ground involuntarily. Why isn't he falling? Isn't he a newcomer? Zamor, is your information accurate? The hall immediately erupted with a spiritual voice that was like a spatial storm. Numerous spiritual consciousnesses moved about freely and expressed their shock and pity, causing the weather in this large area to change, and various phenomena appeared. "All right, all of you shut up." Suddenly, an incomparably tyrannical spiritual consciousness soared into the sky and suppressed all the messy spiritual wave. All the great shaman's expressions changed slightly, but they were helpless and could only withdraw their overflowing spiritual consciousness. "Remember, from now on, you're not allowed to play such boring games with me." The atmosphere in the hall immediately became relaxed. Although Grimm didn't know what they were talking about, he was able to sense the source of the mental fluctuation with his sharp mental perception. This was a spacious, oval crystal hall that resembled an opera house. The hall was high on the left and low on the right, with rows of seats arranged in a staircase. There were more than 1,000 of them, but only 36 magi were seated here and there, all of them rank 5. On the right side of the hall, at the heart of the oval hall, there were 5 crystal seats arranged side by side. However, only a white-bearded old man sat on the second seat from the left. Looking at his old age, no one would suspect anything even if he fell dead on the spot. But when Grimm looked at this person, his eyes were filled with deep reverence. This was because most of the people present were light red in his perception, with only a few appearing dark red or even dark red. However, this white-bearded old man was a piercing dark purple in his eyes. Light red meant a slight threat, dark red meant a moderate threat, dark red meant a great threat, and dark purple meant extreme danger. The battle between the great shamans had obviously shocked the young magus quite a bit. She hurriedly bowed to the white-bearded old man and ran out of the hall without looking back. The white-bearded old man was also sizing Grim up with interest. He used his sharp fingernails to pick up the magic scroll on the crystal table and softly recited, "Grim, a newly advanced magus from the Terran region of the Magus world. Magus of laws, specializing in fire." As the white-bearded old man recited, many of the great magi looked at Grim with an indecipherable expression. The few people who had been specially marked as dangerous by the AI chip were also sizing him up, their gazes revealing a trace of hostility. "All right, since everyone is here, we can start assigning tasks." The white-bearded old man clapped his hands, and an inviolable aura spread out. "Magus Grim, you should also find a place to sit." Grim acknowledged in a deep voice, and with a sweep of his eyes, he chose a relatively spacious corner and sat down. There were close to 1,000 people in the large space, but there were only about 30 or 40 people sitting. The entire hall was naturally empty. However, everyone present was a great magus, and each of them had a large or small spiritual barrier. They would definitely not allow a complete stranger to get too close to them. Thus, under the cover of the huge halo, not only did the hall not seem relaxed, it even seemed a little tense. Some of you might already know who I am, but some still don't. Let me introduce myself. The white-bearded old man chuckled. "My name is Gleason, and I'm the person in charge of this recruitment mission. I'll also be the one who distributes tasks for you during this time. So, if you want to get through this beast hunting campaign safely and return with a bountiful harvest, you'd better behave yourself." After saying this, the white-bearded old man's eyelids drooped, and his small eyes that could barely open suddenly shot out a pure, cold glint that seemed to have substance, coldly sweeping across everyone's faces. Every single rank 5 magus who met his gaze could not help but feel a chill in their hearts, and they took the initiative to look away. Perhaps some of you are participating in a large-scale planar war for the first time, so I'll briefly explain the rules of war. First of all, our main target for this campaign is the rank 8 orc god, Astar. This guy is also known as the One-Eyed Tyrant, a tyrannical, cruel, and bloodthirsty powerful god. The tribes and believers under his rule are all tyrannical and fearsome warriors. Under him, there are close to 20 gods of various sizes, all of whom are orc gods skilled in combat and killing. If we include those Lord God clones, divine clones, consciousness projections, or oracles, the enemy we're facing is also very powerful. However, you don't have to be too afraid. Asterisk and his subordinates will only hide in their divine kingdoms and fly into a rage, not daring to take even half a step out of their divine kingdoms. Therefore, only their avatars or consciousnesses will appear on the battlefield. Those big shots will definitely be dealt with by more powerful magi, so everyone here will have to work harder to ensure the normal operation of our subsidiary legions and foreign legions. The rough and tiring work of attacking planes will naturally be taken over by our subordinate. We will be their barrier, ensuring that they will not be attacked by the orcs' transcendent power. Normally, you don't have to personally go to the front lines. You just need to oversee things here. When your strength is needed, we'll teleport you there. If you want to fight with those orc god clones, you can do so. If you don't want to fight, use your strength to force the enemy to stop them from interfering with our attack force. How about it? Do you understand the nature of the mission? Grim nodded silently. Sure enough, it was similar to the information he had gathered. From the looks of it, it would be very easy for them to come out and reap the rewards of this mission. Moreover, there was one thing that Wizard Gleason did not say clearly. Every orc god clone would have some shard of divinity in their body. As long as they dared to take the risk and kill the lowest-ranked orc god clone, the shard of divinity alone would be more than enough to cover the rewards of this mission. However, orc gods were very good at fighting, and ordinary magi would not dare to think of taking advantage of them. I've said so much. You must be very curious about how our missions are usually distributed. Alright, I'll let you take a look now. The white-bearded Gleason sneered and snapped his fingers. The crystal wall behind him suddenly became clear and transparent, revealing another scene behind it. Behind the crystal wall, there was another huge ring-shaped space. In the center, a huge crystal cluster stood upright, almost piercing through the entire giant rock castle. Surrounding the crystal wand were densely packed with white-robed magi. Most of their bodies seemed to be embedded in the crystal wand, and only a small portion of their faces, including their mouths, noses, and ears, were exposed. In the periphery of the ring-shaped space, there were as many as 11 places like the crystal hall that Grimm was in. The layout of all the crystal halls was similar, like flower petals surrounding the periphery of the ring-shaped space, quietly clustered together. Through the distant space and the transparent crystal wall, Grimm could even see the powerful magi sitting in the crystal hall with their eyes closed. Seeing this scene, Grimm was shocked. There were 12 crystal halls in total. If the number of magi in each hall was the same, it meant that there were almost 500 magi gathered in this giant rock castle. This did not include the magi who were rank 5 and above. Chapter 1454. 3 months later. In a tightly guarded secret room, Grimm was meditating in silence. At his level, ordinary meditation techniques had almost no effect on his mental power. However, the habit that he had developed over the centuries made him accustomed to using meditation to replace sleep. Only when he was too tired would he give up everything and take a deep nap. However, this was a rare occurrence in 100 years. However, just as his soul was drifting and the laws and consciousness were merging, a sweet female voice suddenly rang out in the secret chamber. "Mr. Grimm, it's your turn to be on duty." This was a message from the wizard spirit of Giant Rock Castle. Grimm frowned and slowly opened his eyes. It's time?" Grimm did not dare to delay. He stood up and opened a short-distance teleportation gate. The next time he appeared, he was already at the entrance of the Cloud Hall. As the command center of the entire Orc War, there were 12 crystal halls in Giant Rock Castle for the great wizards to rest and prepare for battle. The hall Grimm was in had the word Cloud as its code, so it was also called the Cloud Hall. 5 other wizards appeared at the same time. After a period of getting used to each other, everyone had a certain understanding of each other. After greeting each other, they walked into the Cloud Hall at the same time. The wizards who were preparing for battle in the Cloud Hall saw them and nodded in greeting. Then, they exploded into different colored fireworks and disappeared. Grimm and the other 5 bowed to Wizard Gleason, who was sitting at the front of the hall, and found a place to sit. Only the 6 of them sat in the crystal hall that could accommodate thousands of people. Everyone was far away from the others, quietly doing what they were interested in. Some took out thick magic books and began to flip through them. Some closed their eyes and began to meditate. Some even gathered a cloud of fog and hid in it. No one knew what they were doing. Only Grimm sat on the crystal chair, watching the activity in the hall through the curtain wall with interest. Without a doubt, this was the command center of the entire war against the Beastmen. Thousands of vassals and foreign legions were scattered around the perimeter, coordinating with the elite Magi troops to launch a continuous attack on the plane ruled by the Orcs. The Magi embedded in the crystal clusters were using some strange method to maintain close contact with the Magi troops millions of miles away, quickly transmitting information about the situation. At the same time, a fierce and bloody war broke out in almost a dozen planes at the same time. However, these wars were millions of miles away, so the high-ranked Magi present could only use simple numbers to describe the cruelty of the war. The cloud front, the Nick Plains attack has been obstructed. The twin-headed dragons have lost 41% of their troops. They urgently need reinforcements. The Milky Way, the Beta Plane has already surrounded the native army in their country. It's said that they're praying for the descent of the orc god Urkin. Headquarters, please send high-end forces to deal with them as soon as possible. The Azure Front, the Maguda Plain is in a state of emergency. A clone of the orc god, Yodera, has suddenly appeared on the battlefield. It's rank 6 and has already caused great damage to our troop. The Wraith army has been destroyed, and their leader, Nemo, has died in battle. The Wood Dragon army has lost 70% of its members, and their leader, Wall, is heavily injured. He's been sent to the nearby stars. Since the enemy had already sent a rank 6 clone to the battlefield, the Magi naturally would not just stand by and watch as it wreaked havoc on the battlefield. Thus, this task was quickly handed over to the Flowery Hall. Moments later, the Flowery Hall flashed with light, and the leading rank 6 Magus was directly teleported to the battlefield with his 2 rank 5 subordinates. At the same time, a few more Magi received orders from the wizard spirits and hurried to the Flowery Hall to take over the positions that had been vacated. More than 10 planes were at war at the same time. Some were stuck outside the plane's barrier, and were still doing their best to break through it. Some had already invaded the interior of the plane, and were fighting a bloody battle with the natives around the teleportation gates or spatial cracks. Some had already completed their conquest, and were sending people to clean up the remnants of the orc god's power within the plane. More than 10 fronts were operating at the same time, and the various miscellaneous tasks were too numerous to enumerate. Every plane needed to deploy Magus troops of different levels according to the size of the native forces. This involved logistics, supplies, operations, reorganization, shifts, and so on. If one considered the changes in the situation on the battlefield, the follow-up responses from both sides, as well as unexpected factors that needed to be paid attention to, all of these things added up would be a severe and terrifying data disaster for any battlefield command center. However, after tens of thousands of years of tempering, the Magus faction had still formed a battle command system with its own characteristic. All the high-grade, low-grade Magi, and even the Great Magi had found their own positions around this battle command system. It was also because of the many vassal forces that the Magi were able to preserve their own elite forces, allowing them to step onto the battlefield at the most appropriate time and place. This would allow them to achieve the greatest degree of victory with the least amount of effort. However, such a war could not last for too long. After all, once the vassal forces' armies were exhausted, if they wanted to attack one plane after another, the Magi's precious forces would have to be depleted. Hence, after the end of the large-scale planar war, the 2 large-scale civilizations that participated in the war needed a certain amount of time to recuperate and wait for the vassal forces to slowly recover. When a large-scale civilization was fat and strong, it was also time for them to open their greedy eyes and search for prey in the multiverse. Seeing the scene before him, Grimm couldn't help but sigh with emotion. This was because in his memory, he seemed to have followed the northern witches to participate in an attack on the orc god plane. That was 200 to 300 years ago. Analyzing the time span, it should be the prelude to this large-scale beast hunting campaign. At that time, he didn't understand the meaning behind his actions at all. He just followed the northern witches in a daze, wanting to save some resources in the planar war. But now, he was sitting in the command center of the sorcerer camp, silently observing the entire process like a third party. At this moment, perhaps there were countless young Magi who held the same thoughts as him and were fighting on the front lines, bathed in blood. Perhaps they would succeed and return home with a large amount of resources. Perhaps they would fail, and in the end, they would fall in some unknown and cold land in a foreign world. However, regardless of success or failure, their participation pushed the Magus faction's war chariot forward, crushing countless orc corpses and fresh blood as they advanced towards the pinnacle of the plane's civilization. The beast hunting campaign had been going on for more than 70 years, almost the same time as the outbreak of the demon tide. Evidently, The witch Barbara who instigated this attack also wanted to take advantage of the time when the defenses of the various planes were weakened during the demon tide to tear off more and fatter flesh from the Orc Gods faction, using the method of eliminating the Orc Gods believers to weaken the Orc Gods' power. As for when the two big shots behind the scenes would confront each other head-on, it was not something that someone at Grimm's level could come into contact with. Perhaps, at this very moment, the real decision-makers of the faction were observing Grimm and his team's every move with a more detached and unrestrained attitude. Every time he thought of this, Grimm's heart would surge with an indescribable and strange feeling. However, at this moment, a magus suddenly shouted in the circular hall. The Milky Way line, the Orc Kingdom in the Beta Plane, has erupted with a supreme power. They used a blood sacrifice to attract the descent of Campbell's clone, estimated to be at grade 5, requesting headquarters to immediately send reinforcements. Almost immediately, the voice of the wizard spirit sounded in the Floral Hall. Magus Gleason of the Floral Hall, please immediately send reinforcements to the Beta Plane. A grade 5 clone of the Orc God, Urkin, naturally did not require the help of a grade 6 Gleason. Thus, Gleason opened his eyes and swept his gaze across the 6 subordinates in the hall. His gaze quickly landed on a wizard named Build. Build, make a trip there. If there's no need, you don't have to fight with them. You just need to deter them from slaughtering our attacking troops. Gleason calmly gave the order, and the latter immediately stood up and bowed in acknowledgement. In the next moment, a huge light formation suddenly appeared in a corner of the Floral Hall, constantly emitting eye-catching spatial undulations. After all, while the battle center was here, every plane battlefield was billions of miles away. If one wanted to reach there directly, personal teleportation spells would be of no use. They could only rely on fixed long-distance teleportation formations. Thus, Magus Build hurriedly walked into the light formation. After a few flicks of his fingers, a dazzling white light flashed, and his figure disappeared without a trace. A moment later, another Magus from the Floral Hall group hurriedly walked in and randomly found a seat to take over Magus Build's position. Once the wheels of war started, they would not stop. Only when one side was completely defeated would it end. Thus, in the next month of Grimm's duty, tens of thousands of battles broke out at the front lines, and the number of great magi sent out also increased day by day. There were as many as 4 missions for the Floral Hall, but the other great magi had already been sent out. Only Grimm and the other great magus were free. Was this considered taking care of him? Grimm could not help but feel curious, but he had no way of finding out. When the month was up, another group of 6 was summoned, and Grimm and the others who were on duty in the Floral Hall could finally relax. Every time they were on duty, they would have 5 to 6 months of free time. For the first 3 months of their free time, they were free to do whatever they wanted. During this time, they could choose to rest in Giant Rock Castle, or they could use their own money to teleport to a warplane that they were interested in to collect some local resources and knowledge. For the next 1 or 2 months, they could only rest and await further orders in Giant Rock Castle. If the war was intense, they would also need to replace the great wizards who went to war and guard the Flowery Hall. In short, at all times, the Flowery Hall had to maintain 6 grade 5 great sorcerers. If the 12 crystal halls were all like this, it meant that this giant rock castle possessed the enormous war energy of 72 great wizards at once. Chapter 1455. Giant Rock Castle, the Grand Wizard's living area. This was an independent living area that was completely isolated from the rest of the castle. Only the Grand Wizards could enter this place. Grimm walked alone in the spacious and bright stone path. After a few turns, he finally arrived in front of a wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. After knocking on the wooden door for a long time, a middle-aged wizard with a gloomy expression and a ferocious green-skinned lizard on his shoulder opened the door. He glanced at Grimm with an unfriendly look and said coldly, "What? You must be Wizard Sharon from the Mountain Ean Plain?" "That's right, I am. And you are?" My name is Grim. I come from the wizard world. I need your help today, Grim said with a face full of smiles. Grim. Wizard world. Never heard of you, Wizard Sharon mumbled. Obviously, he didn't like being disturbed while he was resting. However, seeing that Grim was a wizard from the main plane, Sharon suppressed his anger and let him in. As the top fighting force of the wizard faction, the Grand Wizard's residences were naturally not too shabby. With the help of the dimensional expansion technology, a room that was originally only about 200 square meters had been expanded into a huge space of tens of thousands square meters. The inside was even divided into different areas according to the preferences of the Grand Wizard. Other than the huge guest room, study room, bedroom, and bathroom, there were also the necessary meditation room, sealing room, elemental altar, alchemy lab, and other witchcraft facilities. Here, the Grand Wizards could do their witchcraft experiments without even stepping out of their house. This wizard Sharon was obviously an earth elemental law-defying wizard, so he had a natural affinity with the earth element. Therefore, as soon as he stepped into his residence, it was as if he had suddenly arrived in the depths of a hot and dry desert. The sky was filled with fine sand particles dancing in the wind. In the middle of the desert, there was only a deck chair and an umbrella placed under a date palm tree. Other than that, there was nothing else in the entire desert. Wizard Sharon and Grim only took a few steps to cross the vast desert and arrive under the date palm tree. Since you're here, why don't we sit down and talk? Karen leisurely lay down on the chair, then waved his hand. The sand under Grim's feet quickly rose and formed a deck chair. In the next second, the yellow sand peeled off, revealing a brand new and soft rattan reclining chair. This kind of elemental mimicry could basically be achieved by a Tier 4 wizard. However, a Tier 4 sorcerer could only mimic and modify the most basic elemental substances. They could not mimic other substances with more complex and unique structures. The mimicry vine chair was obviously much more difficult than the wood chair. Grim smiled and sat down. As he sat down, a stream of underground fire spewed out from the depths of the yellow sand, instantly melting the rattan chair into a black and red lava chair. This chair is more comfortable for me, Grim said with a smile. You can sit anywhere as long as you feel comfortable, said Wizard Karen with a fake smile. He didn't seem to care about what Grim had just done, but the brown storm swirling in the depths of his eyes was not as calm as he looked. This was his residence. All the spell circles, runes, energy, and all the floating magic energy were under his direct control. This Grim could use his own elemental laws to forcefully change the environment and steal a little bit of elemental control from Karen's hands. From a certain point of view, he had shown his unfathomable ability to control laws and powerful strength. Although he was not happy, Wizard Karen's attitude towards Grim had become more cautious. Mr. Grim, is there something special that you're looking for me for? Nothing much. I just heard that Wizard Karen is an expert in modifying living things, so I came to ask for your help. You want me to make a wizard beast? Wizard Karen seemed to be very proud of his skills. After hearing this, his face was filled with arrogance. I'm afraid that's not possible. I've been busy making a peak rank 4 wizard beast recently, so I'm afraid. After saying this, Wizard Karen suddenly stopped talking. He looked at the remains of a 7-meter-tall monster that suddenly appeared in front of him with a shocked expression. A multi-armed giant, and it's a rank 5, and its body is so well preserved. Wizard Karen jumped up from his chair and flew to the side of the remains of the multi-armed giant. He didn't care about the filth and burn marks on it. He used his hand to gently stroke the hair that was as thick as needles and began to carefully examine it. Rank 5. It's really rank 5. If I'm not wrong, this multi-armed giant should have been an advanced rank 5 when it was alive. It had an affinity with the earth element. What a pity. You guys didn't know how to protect your spoils of war during the battle. More than 35% of its body has been destroyed. But luckily, Its magic organs are still there. Wait, where's the heart of this multi-armed giant? That's the most important magic organ in its body. Also, where's its head? Since it has reached the advanced rank 5, it must have condensed the crystal of petrification. Where's the crystal of petrification? You didn't lose that crystal of petrification, did you? Crystal of petrification? Grim slightly frowned. He then took out the strange eye of the multi-armed giant from the strange flame dimension. He gently tossed it in his hand and asked, "You mean this?" Wizard Karen turned his head and saw that huge brown crystal. He immediately rushed over and grabbed it in his hand to examine it. He didn't even trust his eyes. He held the crystal of petrification tightly and activated the power of petrification inside. An earthy yellow ray that was as thin as a gossamer hit the armrest of the rattan chair. In the next second, the strange power of petrification quickly spread inside the lounge chair, even transmitting to the yellow sand below, turning the lounge chair, the coconut tree, the parasol, and even the yellow sand within a radius of a dozen meters into grayish-white stones. Such a pure power of petrification! Wizard Karen couldn't help but praise. It was obvious that he loved this crystal of petrification so much that he couldn't let it go. If Grim wasn't of the same rank as him, he might have already robbed it by force. Wizard Karen, you still haven't given me a definite answer. With these materials, can you help me turn them into a rank 5 wizard beast? Grim couldn't help but interrupt Karen's madness. Difficult. Very difficult. Too difficult. Karen couldn't help but mumble. You can't make it? Grim's face darkened. He was a little surprised. It's not that I can't make it. It's just that the multi-armed giant's body has been severely damaged. Even if I successfully make it, its battle power will decrease. If I didn't have the crystal of petrification, I could only make it into the beginner rank 5. Now, I'm pretty confident that I can even make it into the intermediate rank 5. Karen mumbled to himself. His eyes were filled with regret. Although he was already a great rank 5 wizard, and he also had the ability to modify creatures, he couldn't find a suitable rank 5 creature material. He could only take the rank 4 materials and put them together. Even with the limited materials, being able to modify a peak rank 4 wizard beast was already a testament to his extraordinary skills. Intermediate rank 5. Grim muttered. He had just reached the beginner rank 5, and he already had an intermediate rank 5 wizard beast. Moreover, it was an Earth-type wizard beast that specialized in defense. He was already overjoyed. However, Grim was not satisfied. He thought for a moment and took out a soul crystal from the flame dimension. He asked softly, "What if I add the multi-armed giant's soul?" "Soul? You have the multi-armed giant's soul as well?" Karen was shocked. He finally understood something. The shell, the crystal of petrification, and the soul are all in your hands. Did you kill the multi-armed giant by yourself? It was no wonder that Karen had such doubts. 4 great rank 5 wizards like them, it was impossible for them to kill a high-tier rank 5 magical creature by themselves. They could only do so by working together as a team. Even if they were lucky enough to succeed, the so-called spoils of war had to be shared by the whole team. Under such circumstances, it was already extremely rare for a participant to get even a 5th or 6th of the spoils of war. And now, it was obvious that Grim had monopolized almost all of the spoils of war. This seemed like it would only happen if he killed the multi-armed giant by himself. In response to Karen's question, Grim only gave him a brief explanation. There's nothing strange about it. Wasn't there a demon wave before? This multi-armed giant was a lesser lord of calamity. It couldn't think straight and came to our Magus world to cause trouble. I took advantage of the fact that it was greatly weakened inside the plane to kill it with all my might. Hiss! Karen could not help but take a deep breath as if he had a toothache. This wizard Grim's luck was too good. He could even encounter such a good thing. Karen's face was filled with envy and jealousy. However, he did not know that when Grimm killed the multi-armed giant, he was not even at the peak of rank 4. If he knew about this, his shock would probably be 10 times or 8 times greater than what it was before. Alright, Wizard Karen. You haven't told me yet. With the multi-armed giant soul, can you create an advanced rank 5 wizard beast? Grimm could not help but ask the question he was most concerned about. It's very possible. Karen lowered his head and thought for a moment. He gritted his teeth and said, with the crystal of petrification and some resources, I can use the method of flesh regeneration to repair the missing parts of the multi-armed giant. However, you need to be prepared. Without the crucial head and heart, the final product will definitely be weaker. With the multi-armed giant soul, the wizard beast created will have some strange abilities, and there's a chance that it will become your contracted spirit beast. I already have a spirit beast. Give it up. You should know that this might be a Class 5 advanced soul beast, but it's still better than you. Before he could finish speaking, Karen's face twisted as he saw Grimm release a Class 5 plague poison spirit from a godly item. Chapter 1456. Karen could still differentiate between a high-grade rank 5 spirit beast and a low-grade rank 5 soul equipment that could evolve. Karen's heart bled madly when he saw Grimm reveal so many Tier 5 materials. Were rank 5 materials that easy to obtain? Even a Tier 5 great sorcerer would have to risk his life in order to obtain such a high-grade material. Otherwise, they would only be able to obtain some leftover materials from rank 5 creatures. How could they possibly produce a truly high-grade item with just scraps and scraps? Alright. With this soul crystal, the chances of producing a high-grade item have increased greatly. I estimate that if the power of calamity within the soul crystal can be converted into a halo of calamity, there's a 60% chance that the wizard beast will be a mid-grade rank 5 creature, and a 40% chance that it'll be a high-grade one. Karen analyzed from his professional point of view. Grimm nodded his head in satisfaction. The AI chip's analysis was similar to Karen's. At rank 5, the most difficult part of creating high-grade items was no longer the mutual promotion and suppression of the elements, but the manifestation of the power of laws contained within the materials. The higher the grade of the materials, the more difficult it was to process them. Magi had even created a field called material science, which specialized in preserving and activating living creatures to maximize the power of the laws of materials. Such a high-quality corpse of a multi-armed giant could be turned into a rank 5 undead by the Lich Kongnas. However, the power of the laws of earth and calamity contained within the materials was not compatible with the power of death, and the loss in battle would be extremely great. According to the AI chip's calculations, it would be good if it could retain the power of an initial rank 5 creature. For Karen to dare to say such bold words, it was obvious that he was very confident in his exquisite refinement techniques and methods. Since Master Karen is so confident, what price do I need to pay to refine this wizard beast for me? At this point, even Grimm's expression turned solemn. The difficulty of the refinement was so high that ordinary rank 4 magi would naturally not be able to handle it. The price to hire a great rank 5 magus would definitely not be small. Hearing this question, Karen could not help but fall into deep thought. After a long time, he said softly, 30 million magic crystals for 1,500 Sith origin substance. That's the price. I can't go any lower. Of course, if you can take out a portion of Tier 5 intermediate biological material as a reward, I can help you refine it for free. If it's primary grade 5, then I'll need 2. Then magic crystals and origin substance. I can still afford to pay this price. 30 million mana crystals was equivalent to 10 years of the Crimson family's earnings. As for the 1,500 Sith magic crystals, he had to scour the entire central continent to gather them. However, this was not a problem for Grimm. After all, after staying in the central region for so long, He still had this bit of resources in reserve. Since the agreement was a success, Sharon immediately used his hand as a pen to draw up a wizard contract in the void and branded it with his soul brand. After checking that there were no problems, Grimm imprinted his soul imprint on it. With their level of power, even the wizard contract, which was guaranteed by the plane's consciousness, could not completely restrict them. Hence, their contracts were guaranteed by their own laws. If they violated the terms of the contract, they would suffer the backlash of the laws. This also meant that Sharon would no longer be able to control the laws of Earth, and Grimm would not be able to control the laws of fire. It sounded simple, but it had the strongest binding effect on the great magi who lived by laws. No one dared to joke around with their origins laws. They didn't even dare to joke around. With the guarantee of the contract, Grimm could rest assured and hand over the remains of the multi-armed giant, the crystal of petrification, and the soul crystal to Magus Sharon. For these top-grade materials to be able to unleash their full potential, just the activation of the materials would require a lot of effort and a lot of time. Hence, Grimm would probably have to wait a few more years before he could obtain the finished product. After leaving Karen's residence, Grimm hesitated for a moment before walking towards the lower level of the giant rock castle. This was the most active area for rank 3 and 4 magi, as well as the busiest place in the castle's trading market. Giant Rock Castle's 5th level, the trading area. The war against the orcs had been going on for more than 70 years, and during this time, the magi had already broken through 134 orc planes. Many of the rare resources that flowed out from these damaged planes fell into the hands of the high-ranking magi who participated in the planar war. Hence, even though many magi did not have a high rank, they might still have some unexpected treasures, rare treasures, or biological materials in their hands. Hence, many times, those high and mighty magi would secretly disguise themselves and go to these lower-level trading markets to buy some cheap resources. Grimm used the law of fire to transform his body, turning into a muscular man with a face full of beard. Then, he blended into the crowd and strolled around the market. To be honest, the higher the rank, the more primitive it was. Most of the basic resources and materials were hung in the castle's information tower, but the more mysterious or unidentifiable items could only be sold in the form of stalls. Hence, many high-ranked magi set up a stall in the trading area and placed a few odd items on it. They then waited there silently. To find the true treasure from the pile of rubble, it would be a test of the buyer's eyesight. Grimm walked with a smile on his face, seemingly unconcerned. However, deep in his dark red eyes, a blue light flickered as he scanned the items on the stall. Energy radiation intensity, residual elemental undulations, surface patterns, analysis of the basic materials, frequency of the force field. Under many detection methods, as long as there was something special about these items, they would not be able to escape the AI chip's detection. After walking for a while, Grimm finally stopped at a stall by the roadside. The owner of the stall was a rank 3 elemental magus, and he was currently flipping through a book on magic spells in boredom. On top of the stall's black cloth were 3 strange-looking items, and it was difficult to tell what they were used for. The first item seemed to be a piece of armor that had fallen off, and there were still some indistinct magic patterns and faint elemental undulations on it. According to the AI chip's appraisal, it should be a fragment of some sword armor. As it was not a core part, its value was not high. Apart from the metal material that had some research value, it did not have much use. The second item was a tungsten steel longsword. The blade was long and narrow, and it was flat without a sharp edge. There were no magic patterns carved on it, nor were there any magic gems embedded in it. It was simple and plain, like an ordinary sword. However, for some reason, when Grimm's gaze landed on it, he felt an overbearing, sharp, and impending coldness. The third item was a pitch-black stone the size of an egg. Its surface was as smooth as a cobblestone, and he could not sense the aura of magic from it either. As if sensing Grimm's gaze lingering on a few items, the wizard's stall owner hurriedly put away his book and welcomed him with a smile. Magi who could make a living here were no fools. Although Grimm had changed his appearance and restrained his aura of laws, the stall owner could not sense his rank at all. This was enough to explain the problem. The only ones who could fool around in this market were either grade 4 or great sorcerers who were on a whim. Hence, the stall owner calmed himself down and took the initiative to introduce the items passionately. "My lord, these items are all from the Orc Plain. Which one are you interested in?" Grimm first picked up the longsword and tried to sense it from a close distance, but he could not sense any elemental aura. However, the cold aura that was pressing down on him caused him to feel a chill. Although there were no traces of blood on it, there was a bloody aura that assaulted his senses. "What is this sword? It doesn't seem to be a magic weapon?" The stall owner smiled and explained, "This is indeed not a magic weapon, but a ferocious sword that possesses blood aura. Its owner was once a peak rank 4, sword saint, and he had already infused a small portion of his will into the sword. That's why it is so different from the others." "Sword saint?" Grimm frowned slightly. This was one of the more common professions in the Orc Plain, and only the elites of the Orc warriors could advance. Most of their weapons were one-handed greatswords without any elemental force. They were famous for their explosive power, and any spellcaster's elemental barrier would be as weak as an eggshell in front of them. "What about this black stone?" Grimm put down the longsword and finally focused his attention on the black stone. According to the AI chip senses, he could actually sense traces of the aura of laws on it. Anything that had the aura of laws was good stuff. "I don't know either." The stall owner scratched his head and said dejectedly, "These items were obtained from a sword saint. My party spent a lot of effort to kill him, and I only got these 3 items. As for what exactly this black stone is, I wanted to appraise it, but the information tower listed a fee of 300,000 magic crystals. I could only give up." Grimm listened attentively as he examined the black stone in his hand. Finally, he confirmed that it was a seed. The problem now was whether the aura of laws on the seed had come into contact with it because it was close to a certain area, or if it was inherent in its origin. If it was the latter, then this seed could be classified as a grade 5 material. "Tell me, how many magic crystals do you intend to sell this for?" Since he had his suspicions, Grimm did not hesitate to make a move. "Since the appraisal fee for this item is 300,000 magic crystals, I think its original value should be no less than 1,200,000. Seeing that a big customer had arrived, the stall owner hurriedly opened his mouth and stated a sky-high price that made him blush. Chapter 1457. Alright, 2 million it is. At Grimm's level, items that could be bought with mana crystals were no longer a problem. Hearing the other party being so forthright, the face of the stall owner stiffened. Not only did he not feel the slightest bit of happiness, but he instead felt regret. At this point, he already dared to affirm that this black stone was definitely some sort of extremely special item of extraordinary value. He really shouldn't have come to the market to try his luck just to save the appraisal fee of 300,000 magical crystals. Sir, you must have misheard. I just said 3 million magic crystals." The stall owner couldn't help but stutter. "What did you say?" Grimm's face darkened and his eyes narrowed. An austere and cold aura instantly permeated the entire area. 3 million mana crystals wasn't a sky-high price for Grimm. If the stall owner had called out 3 million for the first time, Grimm would have bought it without even batting an eyelid. However, after the verbal agreement was made, the other party went back on his words without any hesitation. This was a direct slap to the face of the great wizard. I meant 3 million. You must have heard wrongly." At this point, the stall owner could only bite the bullet and deny it. While he was clamoring, he was screaming in his heart, Don't be the Grand Wizard, don't be the Grand Wizard. He could not tell Grimm's true level, so he treated him as a hidden Grade 4 ranker. Although Tier 4 players were not to be trifled with, it was still possible for Sure Feng to suppress this matter with his backer. I'll give you one more chance to think about your words. If you want to violate the agreement, don't blame me for being impolite. Grimm sneered. Although their quarrel didn't cause too much of a commotion, it attracted many magi who were strolling around the market. A few stall owners nearby also crossed their arms, looking like they wanted to watch a good show. In such a huge market, there were naturally law enforcement sorcerers. Very quickly, a group of Tier 4 magi dressed in golden robes and adorned with golden badges appeared among the crowd. What are you doing? Why are you all gathered here? If you want to buy something, then hurry up. If you don't want to buy it, then pack up and go back to rest. The enforcer wizard pushed through the crowd and arrived in front of the stall. The stall owner seemed to be a wily old fox. He hurriedly went over and grabbed the leader of the law enforcers. No one knew what he was saying. Lord Kuei? The law enforcer wizard was stunned. How come I've never heard of Master Kuei having a brother like you? Loki. I've always been a low-key person, so I don't like to attract attention by using Mr. Kuei's name, the stall owner said with a fawning look on his face as he continued to transmit his voice to the man. The leading enforcer tilted his head and listened while glancing at Grimm. The moment his gaze fell on Grimm, the law enforcer leader was stunned. He rubbed his eyes and couldn't help but feel a little suspicious. He was only intermediate Grade 4, so he couldn't tell Grimm's rank. How should I address you? Grimm. Why don't I be the peacemaker and let this matter rest? Forget it? How? Grimm sneered. He suddenly reneged on the price of the item that I wanted. How do we settle this? Lord, you need to think carefully. The person standing behind him is Lord Kuei, a Tier 4 apex existence. Not long ago, he killed 2 orc shamans and a sword saint in the planar battlefield. Those 3 were all Tier 4 apex existences. Killing 3 people of the same rank as him with a mere Grade 4 body. This kind of combat power could indeed be called a tyrant. However, this kind of power was still not enough to suppress a great Grade 5 wizard. Grimm didn't want to waste time with these people. He grabbed the black seed and threw a storage ring to the stall owner. 1,200,000 magic crystals. Not a cent less, not a cent more. We're done. The stall owner seemed to feel that he had someone backing him up, and his courage grew. He grabbed Grimm's sleeves and yelled, "Robber! Robber!" A cold glint flashed in Grimm's eyes, and the invisible flame barrier on the surface of his body suddenly appeared. The stall owner's right hand had just touched the barrier when it burst into golden flames. Ah, the stall owner screamed, but he could not shake off the golden flames on his right hand. Instead, the flames slowly spread up his arm, and his whole body seemed to be on fire. Friend, you should leave the thing behind. I've already informed Lord Kuei. If there's any conflict, you can settle it yourselves when he arrives. How about this? The leader of the enforcers was obviously a shrewd person. The more he looked at Grimm, the more he felt that he had an extraordinary background. Hence, he was not willing to participate in this kind of inexplicable matter. However, Lord Kuei was a peak existence among all the Grade 4 wizards. If he allowed Grimm to burn Lord Kuei's brother to death, he would not be able to explain himself when Lord Kuei came looking for him. However, just as the crowd was fighting, a cold and ruthless voice sounded from behind them. Who is it? Who hurt my brother? I think you're tired of living. Hearing this voice, the crowd of onlookers suddenly parted, and a burly and valiant bald man walked in from the outside. He was carrying 2 gigantic magic blades on his back, which looked exaggerated. He wore black leather pants, and his upper body was covered with magic dragon leather armor. His body was covered in gaudy indigo runes. His movements were filled with a ruthless and cruel aura. It's Lord Kuei. Lord Kuei is here. This new magus is in trouble, whispers could be heard from the crowd around him. Their words were filled with fear and dread towards this super-expert. Grimm's expression gradually turned ugly. The onlookers thought that he was afraid, but only he knew that Grimm felt that he had put on a new pair of shoes but stepped on a pile of dog sh*t. As a dignified grand sorcerer, it was simply too unbecoming of him to mingle with these marketplace hooligans. Perhaps he should not have hidden his identity from the start. Even if that magus had eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's guts, he would not have the guts to go against a great magus. Grimm was so angry that he laughed. He turned around and coldly sized up this Lord Kuei, who had just appeared. It had to be said that this Lord Kuei had a good appearance. Moreover, as a physique-tempering magus, he could already fuse his willpower into his body and the magic blades on his back. Even among the peak rank 4 magi, he could be considered a top-notch existence. As soon as this Lord Kuei stepped into the arena, he saw that the golden flames had already reached the upper arm of the magus. He furrowed his brows and separated his hands. The magic blades that were enshrouded in a cold, dark green glow appeared in his hands. In the next second, the cold light flashed, and the magus' right arm was chopped off. He screamed in pain and was sent flying. The severed right arm fell to the ground and exploded into a ball of flames, turning into a pile of ashes in an instant. The onlookers gasped in surprise. They did not understand why this Lord Kuei would attack his own brother as soon as he arrived. Only a few people could vaguely guess that there was something strange about that ball of flames, which forced the magus to cut off its path of burning. Grimm's eyes also flashed with a hint of surprise. This Lord Kuei was really something. He had actually sensed the vicious nature of the golden flames and wanted to use his fierce battle intent to cut off the secret lock between the inextinguishable flame and the magus soul. Unfortunately, his eyesight was not good enough. He did not notice that the ball of golden flames was not driven by the power of laws, but by the power of laws. The difference between a single word could make a huge difference. That was the difference between a mortal and a god. Kid, don't be too arrogant. If I want him to die, you won't be able to save him. Grimm snorted and snapped his fingers. The magus who had been thrown against the wall and was struggling to get up saw a flash of red light from his severed arm. The golden flames seemed to have appeared out of thin air and started burning again. Grimm wasn't exaggerating. With his current strength, killing a Tier 3 sorcerer would be as easy as squashing an ant. However, he did not want to be too ruthless in this foreign battlefield, so he used the inextinguishable flame to punish him. Unfortunately, Kuei, who had been on the run and killing for years, had been overwhelmed by his raging battle intent. He shouted, "How dare you!" and charged at Grimm while brandishing his magic blades. Halfway through, Kuei's body disappeared without a trace with a swing of his dark green blades. Yet, he still dared to attack. At this point, Grimm could not take it anymore. A vast and mighty willpower suddenly spread out from his body, instantly enveloping an area of more than 10 meters around him. Kuei had just appeared less than 5 meters behind Grimm when he was pushed out of the plane by an irresistible force. He brandished his magic blades that were filled with a wild and tyrannical aura, looking as if he was going to break through Grimm's defenses and cut him in half. Unfortunately, that was as far as his attack went. Mysterious chains of fire reached out from the depths of the void, shuttling back and forth on his body, entangling him tightly and preventing him from moving. Meanwhile, that terrifying scorching willpower passed through the laws and entered his body, actually using his surging battle intent as nourishment and igniting it. Kuei finally realized that things were not looking good. His eyes widened as he shouted, You're a grade 5 magus." Grade 5. Great magus. Only then did the onlookers realize that something was wrong and quickly retreated. Chapter 1458. Rank 5. It was an unreachable rank in the eyes of most wizards. Great wizards who could advance to rank 5 were even more terrifying than peerless beasts. The crowd panicked. All the wizards retreated quickly, including the law enforcer wizards. The only people left in the field were Grim and Kuei, who were standing 5 meters away from each other. Grim slowly turned around and coldly looked at Kuei, who was still struggling with all his might. He sneered, "Kid, open your eyes wide before you attack next time. Don't mess with people you can't afford to mess with." Although Kuei's body was bound by the flame chains, he continued to slash the chains with his magic blades, causing sparks to fly everywhere. The magic blades seemed to have reached the limit of a law wizard artifact, and they carried a hint of the power of the law. It was obvious that Kuei was talented, especially in the path of blood and slaughter. The magic blades were completely soaked in his tyrannical and bloody will. They had terrifying magic power that could shake people's minds. If Kuei's opponent was an ordinary grade 4 wizard, Kuei would be able to take advantage of a moment of carelessness in a life-or-death battle. The final result would be the death of the wizard artifact, and all the essence and blood in the body would be absorbed by the magic blade. As a physique refinement wizard, Kuei did not focus his training on his own body. Instead, he poured most of his resources and effort into refining an external object. Although this was rare, it was still a different kind of physique refinement wizard. Physique refinement wizards who practiced this way would have a slightly weaker body, but they would possess a powerful wizard artifact that surpassed their rank. Other physique refinement wizards tempered their body to be as indestructible as a wizard artifact, but physique refinement wizards tempered their wizard artifact to be like their other body, powerful and unstoppable. This kind of physique refinement wizard was extremely terrifying. What they pursued was extreme lethality, and they often had a terrifying explosive power. Unfortunately for him, he might not have many opponents in the same tier as him, but against a Tier 5 great sorcerer, his meager strength was laughable. He wanted to leave, but he couldn't. The void around him had been tightly sealed by the chains of law, and he couldn't use his teleportation abilities at all. He wanted to advance, but he couldn't. Although Grim was less than 5 meters away from him, this distance was like the distance between worlds. No matter how many times he attacked, he couldn't close the gap. He was like a flying insect that had fallen into a spider's web, and he was still struggling with all his might, wanting to break free from the shackles around him. Unfortunately, the fiery chains coiling around him were so dense that they made him feel despair. Even if he managed to cut off a few of them, there would be even denser chains of laws extending over, continuously sealing off his last space of movement. Meanwhile, the golden flames attached to the chains of laws were constantly licking his body. The bone-melting, flesh-corroding, and soul-piercing pain made him even crazier and more reckless. However, no matter how hard he tried, the difference in rank and strength between them was too great. It was so great that he couldn't rely on battle techniques or his berserk battle intent to make up for it. Grim, on the other hand, was like a spider entrenched in the center of a spider's web, looking down at the flying insect struggling in its trap, quietly waiting for the moment when it ran out of energy. As for the invincible flames, they penetrated through the layers of laws and invaded his body, slowly corroding his flesh and life in places invisible to the naked eye. Kuei, on the other hand, was struggling with all his might to prevent the laws of fire from invading his soul. If the laws of fire really did invade his soul, it wouldn't just be his body and flesh that would be damaged, but his soul's potential to advance to grade 5 in the future. Therefore, no matter how hard and painful it was, he didn't dare to relax at all. The crowd retreated one after another. In the face of an enraged Grand Wizard, no one dared to look for trouble while he was in a fit of anger. One by one, the sorcerers took out all sorts of communication devices and began to quickly contact their respective backers, passing on this information as soon as possible. Even the leader of the enforcers had no choice but to contact the wizard spirit of the castle. In the next second, an enormous spiritual will descended on the area. It was as if there was a pair of eyes staring at Grimm's body from afar, looking straight into his soul. Great Wizard Grimm, please be mindful of your methods. According to the rules of Giant Rock Castle, Article 187, Section 3, you are not allowed to kill magi of the same faction without a reason. Otherwise, you will be forced to carry out a mission and be punished with a large amount of magic crystals. I didn't kill him, I only punished an offender. What, does Giant Rock Castle allow a low-ranked magus to take the initiative to attack a higher-ranked magus? Grimm used his flames to torment Kuei while conversing with the wizard spirit. Of course not. Giant Rock Castle will not allow any low-ranked magus to offend our esteemed guest. However, this Kuei is one of the strongest grade 4 magi in Giant Rock Castle. If there's no need, it's best not to use him internally. Faced with a Tier 4 Pinnacle Super Powerhouse and a Tier 5 Great Sorcerer, Boulder Castle's shaman knew how to balance this bowl of water. I understand. I won't harm his soul. I'll just roast his body to vent my anger. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. I hope you have a good time. Also, I'd like to remind you that another Grand Magus who is closer to Kuei is rushing over. In order to avoid a conflict between Grand Magi, please take note of the severity of your punishment. Another Grand Magus Grimm's brows furrowed, and he could not help but sigh inwardly. Even the Magi community, which seemed to be far away from the secular world, had such a complicated network of relationship. Beat the little one and the big one, beat the big one and the old one. This logic was true no matter where one went. Just as Grimm was silently lamenting, a deep and aged voice suddenly echoed in the area. Friend, you've had enough fun. Can you give me some face and let him go? Grimm tilted his head slightly, and his line of sight immediately caught sight of an old magus flying in the air. He wore a black magus robe, and his hair was silvery white. One of his eyes was red and the other was black. His face was covered in fine wrinkles. The old magus seemed to have come in a rage, and a tyrannical aura surged around him. He greeted Grimm with a smile from afar. However, there was not the slightest hint of a smile in his squinted eyes. Instead, they were overflowing with an extremely dense killing intent. Who are you, sir? Grimm asked indifferently. Jose Moody, from the Blacklight Plane. I'm currently in charge of guarding the Thunder Hall. Grimm, from the Magus World, Flowery Hall. After listening to Grimm's self-introduction, Magus Jose's face suddenly revealed a sinister smile, and he chuckled. So it's a Magus from the Origin Plane. I was wondering why you were so mighty. As everyone knew, the Magus faction had successively conquered and enslaved dozens of planes to become the cradles of a new generation of magi. Among the many sorcerer planes, the sorcerer world was undoubtedly the most important, the most special, and the highest-ranking plane. Many of the sorcerer planes were already at the level of a main plane, but there was only one origin plane, and that was the sorcerer world. That was the origin of the sorcerer faction, and it was also the origin plane of the 3 known Grade 9 Magi. Therefore, in the hearts of all Magi, the sorcerer world naturally had a halo that was superior to others, and it was different from others. The sorcerer world had a high status, and even the Magi from the origin plane had a slightly higher status than other Magi from the main plane. This was also an unwritten rule within the sorcerer faction. Most of the time, Magi from the sorcerer world were regarded as orthodox and mainstream, while Magi from other planes could only serve as foils and side branches. Perhaps it was because of this special characteristic that Magi from other planes had a faint hostility and dissatisfaction towards Magi from the sorcerer world. These small details were often directly reflected in the interactions between Magi. The moment he opened his mouth, there was nothing good to say. This caused Grimm's pent-up anger to rise uncontrollably. Truth be told, ever since he had chosen the path of having an affinity with the fire element, Grimm's temperament had become much more explosive and wild than before. Although he was still clear-headed, There were more and more situations where he would fight on the spot. There was nothing he could do about it. Soul modification could indeed change a part of one's innate character, and this was a small disadvantage that Grimm had to bear as a fire magus. Grimm snorted coldly and waved his hand. Kuei, who had been roasted to a crisp on the outside and tender on the inside, was thrown in front of the old magus with a flaming chain. Kuei was rather strong-willed. Even after suffering such severe damage, he did not cry out in pain. Moreover, even though he was heavily injured and the two magic blades in his hands were scorching red, he still held them tightly and did not let go. Old Master! Seeing the old magus, Kuei opened his mouth and called out with great difficulty. At the same time, a thin, colorless, transparent flame emerged from the scorched and cracked mouth. It was obvious that his body had been completely roasted by this strange flame. The old magus bent down to check Kuei's soul origin. After confirming that it had not been harmed by the enemy, he let out a long sigh. This caused him to raise his head and look at Grimm with a hint of gentleness in his cold gaze. Magus Grimm, I don't know how my disciple has offended you, but I hope you can explain. He did not offend me. The one who offended me is this fellow. Grimm tilted his head and glanced at the stall owner magus. Your disciple wanted to stand up for him and tried to sneak attack me. Of course, I have to punish him. The old magus turned his gaze towards the stall owner magus, and a sinister expression immediately appeared on his face that said, I knew it was you. After gnashing his teeth for a while, he finally chose to face Grimm. We are all here on a mission. Why don't you give me some face and let these two go? I am willing to bear all your losses. It's not really a loss. I've already punished them, so I'll leave them to you. You can bring them back at any time. I won't be staying here any longer. Goodbye. Grimm couldn't be bothered to waste time with him, so he simply said a few words before turning around and leaving. Chapter 1459. For months later, while Grimm was quietly waiting for his shift in the Flowery Hall, his first planar mission suddenly came. The Yunyang front line has been attacked. Many divine avatars of the Orc god have descended. The attacking force has suffered great losses. Headquarters, please send reinforcements immediately. A magus suddenly shouted in the busy and noisy hall, attracting the attention of all the magi on duty. In the planar attack diagram that was as dense as stars, one of the stars immediately erupted with a glaring red light and began to flicker rapidly. The great magi in the various guardian halls opened their eyes simultaneously, receiving battle reports from the shaman spirits while silently waiting for orders to be given. As expected, the relevant battle orders were transmitted to the corresponding guardian halls after a few seconds. This time, a total of 3 guardian halls were selected. The members for the battle were 1 grade 6 great magus and 4 grade 5 great magi. Grimm's Flowery Hall was assigned a grade 5 great magus. Magus Gleason's gaze fell on Grimm. Grimm, I'll leave this mission to you. Yes. He had been here for half a year, yet his first mission was already the most dangerous battle mission. Grimm could not help but curse inwardly. However, he remained calm on the surface. He stood up and walked to the teleportation circle that suddenly appeared in a corner of the hall. In an instant, the teleportation circle flickered, and the scene before him changed. He had already arrived in a wider and busier battle hall. Under the guidance of a witchcraft puppet, he quickly met up with the other great wizards who were fighting with him. The grade 6 great magus was a magus called Wind Fury. His entire body was made up of twisted black smoke, and his face could not be seen at all. The other 3 great magi were 2 men and 1 woman. They were of different shapes and sizes, and the aura of laws around them was so dense that it was almost tangible. After the 5-man battle team had gathered, the shaman spirit in charge of mobilizing the battle immediately descended and quickly communicated with them. The orc plane you're heading to this time is a medium plane. It's ruled by an orc kingdom with a large population and resources. Our vanguard has already established a firm foothold there, and conquered nearly 10,000 miles of land in the Orc Kingdom. Now, the other party has suddenly sent a large number of beast god clones. It's obvious that they want to annihilate our vanguard team and kick us out of the Ghoulan dimension. Therefore, your mission is to protect the vanguard and repel or annihilate those beast deity clones. Minimum mission requirements. 1. Protect the recently integrated Orc city of Danmothro. 2. Protect the wizard tower that is under construction. 3. Protect the rank 4 core Magus Kurt of the vanguard. His soul contains the spatial beacons needed for the subsequent teleportation. The duration of the mission is 3 months. After 3 months, the construction of the wizard tower will be completed and the planar gate will be successfully activated, and your mission will be considered complete. Alright, the mission introduction is complete. We are now preparing to teleport you to the front lines of the plane. Please get ready to teleport. After listening to the introduction of the wizard spirit in the castle, the few great wizards had a preliminary understanding of the situation there. The few of them exchanged glances. They suppressed the law fluctuations in their bodies and stood closer together. A moment later, an abnormally large runic light array appeared beside them, and the field overflowed with terrifying spatial fluctuations. Not only was the distance of the teleportation extremely far, but they also had to resist the interference of the opposite plane's barrier. Therefore, the risk of teleportation was very high. However, this was obviously not a threat to the great wizards, who had already transcended mortality. Therefore, after a moment of dizziness, when they opened their eyes again to see their surroundings clearly, they had already arrived in a foreign country with a completely different style. As soon as they stepped out of the teleportation light array, countless law chains entangled them in the void of the plane. These law chains ignored the elemental protection outside their bodies and went straight into the depths of their souls. If not for the layer of law light blocking them, they might have been able to directly touch the source of their souls. Many of the great wizards frowned, and the originally surging and tyrannical energy aura in their bodies instantly dropped. If it had been those low-level wizards who had suddenly transmigrated, they might have been suppressed by this malevolent plane's consciousness to the point where it would be difficult for them to even stand up. However, those present were all great wizards. With their own law light, they could isolate the law chains that were extended from the plane's consciousness. In this way, the suppression and influence they suffered would be reduced by a lot. However, in this world filled with hostility, it would be extremely difficult for them to replenish any energy from the outside world. It was as if they were trapped in a boundless desert. Other than the wizard energy contained in their bodies, they could not absorb any energy from the outside world. In such a situation, if they wanted to fight against an enemy of the same level, the risks and dangers would undoubtedly be many times greater. Welcome, welcome. I'm very happy to see you all. Since you've just arrived, why don't you rest for a while in the camp? Just as the few great wizards were quietly adjusting their state, a few level 4 wizards in charge of managing the large outpost camp gathered around them and bowed in greeting. I'm Merola, the commander in charge of this attack on the Gale Dimension. I'm Dutter, in charge of the Wizard Beast Army. I'm Kurt, in charge of the Wizard Pagoda's teleportation formation. The few level 4 people in charge stepped forward to introduce themselves, but the group did not pay much attention to them. Instead, upon hearing Kurt's name, the few great wizards shifted their gazes, engraving this fellow who had been specially mentioned in the mission into their hearts. This was a middle-aged wizard with an unprepossessing appearance. He had long brown hair and a skinny figure, his body emanating an extremely dense aura of wind particles. He was only at the beginner level of level 4, and he did not have a valiant aura. There were also no traces of powerful wizard weapons in his body. For a fellow like him to be able to step foot into such an important dimensional battlefield, it was obvious that he did not exist as a battle wizard. Instead, He relied on his unique profession as a spell formation master. In an instant, the few great wizards, including Grimm, had already investigated Kurt's background. As for this Kurt, being stared at by a few grand sorcerers at the same time, he instantly felt immense pressure, and even his forehead was covered in sweat. "Go do what you need to do. There's no need to keep circling around us. Merola and Kurt, stay behind. The rest of you can leave." The leader of the group, the grade 6 Great Wizard Fengli, was also a capable person. After waving his hand to dismiss the miscellaneous people, he left behind the two most important people for this mission. Under the lead of Merola, the great wizards walked towards the city hall of this enormous orc city. Using this opportunity, Grimm was able to personally examine this sturdy fortress that was filled with a strong orc style. Tall, rugged, barbaric, fierce, these were the words that naturally appeared in Grimm's mind after he used his spiritual force to scan the orc city of Danmador. The entire city was made up of huge square rocks that were as tall as a person. There was no need to carve any sturdy spell formations, as the stone itself was shockingly sturdy. The tall and rugged city walls, the densely packed turrets and bastions, the thick wooden stakes that were inserted into the city walls and intersections, the broken but still fluttering beast-hide war flags. It could be seen that this orc city had just fallen into the hands of the wizards. Many orc-style decorations and signs had not been removed yet. At this moment, the entire city was like a busy construction site. There were collapsed buildings everywhere, and there were long lines of witchcraft puppets cleaning up the debris under the command of the wizards. Other than sturdy stone houses and camps, there were also many haphazardly built cowhide tents and wooden buildings. From their crooked and crude appearance, it was impossible to guess what their original purpose was before the war. The terrifying flames of war had once burned the entire city, and every corner of this place was once a battlefield bathed in blood. Hence, there were not many buildings that could be preserved in good condition. The city hall could be considered an exception among the exceptions. Along the way, Grimm could clearly see the smoke and burn marks on the surface of every tall stone building. Some orc corpses that could not be cleaned up in time were lying in the alleys and corners of the street. There were still traces of wizard beasts gnawing on them. Speaking of which, it was strange. Humans, orcs, elves, and dwarves were intelligent races that occupied the main positions. Although there were slight differences between them in different planes, it was still easy to distinguish them with a single glance based on their strong racial styles. At the corner of a street that Grimm and the others passed by, there was a huge wooden prison filled with a large number of injured orc warriors who had been captured. Almost all of them were muscular and at least 2 meters tall. They had tall and sturdy bodies with light green hard skin. Their bodies were filled with explosive power. Their skin was rough, their pores were thick, and their veins were bulging like little snakes. What was even more shocking was their ugly and ferocious faces, wide bloody mouths, sharp fangs protruding from their lips, and huge eyes that were like copper bells. Such a shape made it difficult for people to think of them as intelligent life forms. They would only think of them as some kind of modified barbaric and ferocious beast. Perhaps only the beast god Ashi could accept such ugly and ferocious creations. Just as Grimm and the others were about to reach the city hall, a powerful fluctuation of laws that made one's heart palpitate suddenly came from the horizon. Immediately, the snake eye ring on the commander-in-chief Merola shone with a dazzling green light. Merola gently rubbed the snake eye ring and quickly contacted someone in the distance. Finally, she could not help but let out a sigh. "Sirs, the avatars of the beast god seem to know of your arrival. They're already speeding up the elimination of our peripheral forces. Just now, a unit that was sent out was annihilated by the enemy. How many did we lose?" Fengli, who was leading the team, asked coldly. Chapter 1460. Ear Plain, Thousand Flowers Valley. The flames of war had yet to be extinguished, and the entire battlefield was a mess. The once beautiful Thousand Flowers Valley, where bees and butterflies were buzzing and wild flowers were in full bloom, had now become a scorched land. Everywhere, one could see the tragic scene of elemental sorcery wreaking havoc. On the continuous green grassland, one could see broken and ferocious corpses. These corpses were all wrapped in various types of wizard robes, and the accessories on their bodies were still shining with dazzling magical radiance. Other than the dead wizards, one could see many huge, hideous, and terrifying wizard beasts on the battlefield. Their numbers were more than 10 times that of the dead wizards, and their combat power was extremely terrifying. Teams of orc warriors shuttled through the battlefield, searching for survivors on their side while using the sharp knives in their hands to cut off the ears of their enemies. The leather pouches on their waists were already bulging, and they were stuffed with trophies that represented their personal glory. Other than these orc warriors, there were also some skinnier shaman apprentices wrapped in animal skin robes, and their faces and bodies were covered in indigo paint. They were not interested in trophies like the ears, but focused on searching for those wizard accessories or tools that shone with magical radiance. As elemental spellcasters, orc shamans could also use those common wizard accessories. Therefore, in the Orc Kingdom, the price of wizard accessories had always been high, and they were considered the most popular items. It couldn't be helped. As an intelligent race with violence and barbarism flowing in their blood, the entire social system of the Orc Kingdom measured one's status based on one's bravery. Therefore, the entire Orc Kingdom was filled with combat professions, and only a small number of shamans and witch doctors had some elemental spellcasting abilities. However, as believers of the Orc god, although they had lost most of their elemental abilities, they had also built a different and powerful system of beast soul heroic spirits. With the help of shamans, the strong people in the Orc Kingdom could obtain the blessing of the Orc god by sacrificing ferocious beasts or offering their loyalty. From there, they could seal the souls of some powerful magical beasts in their own bodies. In times of battle, they could summon the beast souls in their bodies, and from there, they could possess a strong physique and powerful combat skills that were comparable to magical beasts. Therefore, in the ear plane, the most powerful people were the beast soul warriors. A single power system allowed the ear plane to have many warriors, but it didn't have the necessary alchemists and alchemy system. That was why even the best beast spirit warriors here were only using the simplest and crudest methods to refine primitive weapons. At this moment, on a certain hill on the side of Myriad Flowers Valley, there were 5 tall and sturdy figures standing side by side. All of them had green skin and wore dark green leather pants on their lower bodies. Their upper bodies were muscular, and their bodies were filled with a cruel and violent aura. Their chests and backs were protruding with lifelike beast heads. As they bared their fangs and brandished their claws, they seemed to exude a violent aura. The Magi's reinforcements have arrived. The one in the middle of the 5 with the most berserk aura suddenly opened his huge eyes that were like copper bells. He pointed at Damodar City and said angrily, "Just now I sensed 5 completely different auras coming from there. It seems like the enemy's Grand Magus has already entered this plane." Another orc with the image of a demonic tiger roaring at the sky on his chest sneered, "If my lord's senses aren't wrong, why don't we launch a sneak attack on their base camp? Those Grand Magi haven't stabilized their footing, and definitely haven't adapted to the environment here. We can." At this point, he couldn't help but stick out his scarlet tongue and lick his lips. "I don't think so." Another orc stood out. "That place has already become the base camp of the invading Magi. There must be many annoying spell formations and traps set up there. If we barge in without knowing anything and fall into an ambush, I'm afraid that the situation that had just taken a turn for the better will be reversed once again. Moreover, we haven't completely fused with the beast soul seeds that Lord Beast God bestowed upon us. There's a limit to how long we can maintain the Beast God projection. Therefore, we might as well wait for a while longer. Wait until we can fully unleash the power of the beast god projection before we go and find those magi. Wait. You fellows only know how to wait and wait. When you're ready, those human magi will also be ready. How much better will the situation then be? You bunch of cowards, are you even fit to be called beast spirit warriors? Shut up, black barbarian. If you continue to be so unreasonable, I'll challenge you. Challenge me then. Who's afraid of you? Seeing that his companions were getting angrier and angrier, the orc who was obviously the strongest among them suddenly roared. All of you, shut up. Whether we should fight or not, whether we want to fight, won't we know once we go and take a look? Let's go, we'll make a trip to Damodar City now. If the enemy isn't prepared, we'll charge in directly. If the enemy is prepared, listen to my orders and retreat to Blackwater City. Gather all the beast spirit warriors in the plain and fight to the death with the enemy. Yes. This orc clearly had a high prestige in everyone's hearts. As soon as he spoke, the orcs stopped arguing and began to check their weapons and equipment, making the final preparations for the fierce battle that was about to erupt. Go, with a roar, the 5 orcs immediately took large strides, sprinting in the direction of Damodar City. As for the orcs that were scattered around the Thousand Flowers Valley cleaning up the battlefield, they could only watch dumbfoundedly as the few figures turned into rolling dust dragons and disappeared into the horizon. Only then did the guards and attendants of the orcs come to a sudden realization, and they yelled as they chased after the orcs. All of you get ready, those orc warriors will be here soon. Within Damodar City, the great rank 6 Magus, Feng Li, stood on the tallest building in the city, silently communicating with Grimm and the rest using mental language. So fast. A Magus with a rat's head and a golden ring on his head exclaimed in surprise, "Don't tell me they're coming after sensing our aura?" Hee, Bao family magi, you don't know. These orcs don't have any brains, and the higher their rank, the more brainless they are. There's no use in scheming against them, they'll just fight us head-on like those abyssal demons. The only female Magus in the team chuckled. I bet those guys won't even bring any guards or bodyguards. They'll just kill their way here without any concealment. Grimm could not help but frown. The beast spirit warriors in this plane are already quite powerful individually. If they have the beast god's projection, it'll be even more difficult to deal with them. We haven't finished analyzing the plane yet, and our battle strength is severely suppressed. If we fight them, you don't have to worry about that. The Magus Feng Li chuckled. I brought a portion of rotten root potion with me this time. If those orcs push us too far, we'll fight back and make them feel pain. Rotten root potion? That's great. The rest of the Magi were overjoyed when they heard this name. Perhaps Grimm was the only one who had never heard of this name. However, he had heard of a similar name before, the Rotten Root. When he followed the northern witches to attack the beast god plane, they had sacrificed hundreds of thousands of orcs to the Rotten Root, using it to grow into a powerful yet strange evil tree. That evil tree had the terrifying power to corrupt and destroy the plane's consciousness. Because of this, it even attracted the main body of the Orc God System's Level 7 god, Garen. If that Level 7 god had not been lured away by another powerful witch, Grimm and his team might not have been able to escape the attack of the god of massacre, Garen. Today, when Lord Feng Li mentioned the Rotten Root potion, Grimm could not help but think of the Rotten Root. Perhaps there really was some secret connection between the two. As if noticing that Grimm had no reaction to the Rotten Root potion, the witch named Catherine could not help but secretly transmit her voice. The Rotten Root potion is an extremely powerful witchcraft item. It's priceless. Every drop of it, after being refined using a special method, can instantly destroy the law chain of the plane within a 10-mile radius. Hearing this, Grimm could not help but take a cold breath and said in shock, "Doesn't that mean that every drop of it can instantly seize control of the plane within a 10-mile radius from the plane's consciousness?" "That's how it is." Which Catherine smiled and said, "If it wasn't so powerful, Why would the giant rock castle be so assured to send us into the plain? It's fine if those orcs don't come, but if they do, we'll give them the chance to suffer. When that time comes, don't forget to take care of me, little brother." After saying that, she even smiled at Grim and gave him a flirtatious look, which Catherine's voice was extremely charming and sweet. When one closed their eyes and listened to it, it was so coquettish that it made one's heart itch. However, her body was so fat and bloated that it could be compared to a 500-kilogram sow. Her face and body were covered in layers of fat, and they were overflowing with a greasy luster. Just looking at them would cause one to shiver uncontrollably. The extremely seductive voice and the extremely disgusting fat body. The two extremes made everyone who saw her feel like they had a mental breakdown. They didn't know whether to believe their own eyes or ears. Chapter 1461. Just as Grim was about to explode in anger, a loud rumble in the distance alleviated his embarrassment. The orcs had arrived. The few magi looked at each other and stepped out of the city hall. They slowly floated into the sky and flew towards the northern city walls. The orcs that had come from afar finally met the few magi 3 miles away from Damodar City. The rumbling dust finally stopped. When the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, 5 strange orc powerhouses of different shapes and professions were revealed. 2 beast spirit warriors, 1 shaman, 1 sword saint, 1 beast tamer. The combination of occupations was reasonable, but there were too many melee fighters and too few elemental long-range attackers. However, this was not their fault. The orcs had always lacked the brains to play around with elemental spells. In the ear plane, be it orcs or magi, the upper limit of power they could display was the peak of grade 4. However, the orcs could summon the blessings of the orc god and obtain divine strength, while the magi had special methods to break through the limit of the plane's power. Hence, if they were to really fight, both sides were evenly matched. Victory or defeat depended on their individual strength. Grim floated in the air, using the power of laws to fight against the omnipresent laws of the plane. He silently sized up the 5 orcs in front of him. They were indeed mortals, and had not reached the stage of transcendence. However, in the depths of their souls, there was a golden ball of light that one could not look at directly. Within it there was a faint, undetectable, and strange consciousness undulation. God's subjugation. Consciousness projection. In an instant, these 2 familiar terms slowly flowed through Grim's mind. The 5 orcs in front of him were no longer him. After going through a special god's subjugation ceremony, the orc gods in the faraway divine kingdoms had already projected their consciousness into the depths of their souls. From there, they could sense everything they saw and heard from afar. Hence, the battle with the magi would not only involve the 5 orcs in front of them, but also the 5 consciousness projections in their souls that were itching to have a go. To be honest, when they found out that the beastmen's bodies were just projections of their consciousnesses and not the real bodies of the beast god, the few great sorcerers' desire to fight was instantly reduced by half. It couldn't be helped. Fighting with this kind of consciousness projection was not worth it. Even if he won by a fluke, he wouldn't be able to obtain the precious Godhead fragment. Therefore, when they realized that the other party was using the godly subduing spell, the great warlocks could not muster up the energy to fight. It should be noted that most gods hid their true bodies in their divine kingdoms to avoid being besieged. They had many ways to extend their power. If they wanted to project their power into the plane, the most common methods they used were God's vanquish spells or clones. Both were means of projecting one's consciousness, but the substance they carried was completely different. The God's vanquish spell was to project part of the soul power of the believers' bodies and control their bodies by merging or occupying them. In this way, the god obtained a consciousness carrier that could walk freely within the plane. Apart from that, the gods could also send down their will without relying on the bodies of their believers. However, a divine spark shard was required to act as a carrier of power, which was why it was called a god's avatar. Both methods had their advantages and disadvantages, and it didn't matter which was better or worse. While the god's vanquish spell could project power, it was severely restricted by the quality and basic combat strength of the individual that was summoned. If the individual's basic strength was insufficient, they would not be able to display the full might of the beast god's consciousness projection. While the god's avatar did not have this problem, it gave the enemy a chance to steal the divine spark shard. It had to be known that the world of gods and the Magus faction had been at war for so long that they knew each other inside out. They had plenty of methods to destroy the other party's power. A divine spark shard was a crystallization of the purest laws of the world. Whether it was a Magus or a god, it was an irresistible temptation. Even the tiniest piece of divine spark shard could save a Magus close to 1,000 years of comprehending laws. To the Magus faction, which had always valued strength above all else, this was a gift from the heavens that they could only dream of. To the world of gods, a single divine spark shard could allow a lowly mortal to immediately become a demigod at the peak of the world, which was the peak of rank 4. 10 divine spark shards fused into one to form a true divine spark, allowing one to transcend the mortal world and become an immortal god. The ranks of the gods could be deduced in this manner. Those who had one complete divine spark were low-grade gods, rank 5. Those who had 2 complete divine sparks were mid-grade gods, rank 6. Those who had 4 complete divine sparks were high-grade gods, rank 7. Those who had 8 complete divine sparks were greater gods, rank 8, and those who had 16 complete divine sparks were main gods, rank 9. This was an important indicator in the world of gods for dividing the ranks of the god. However, there were many times when the gods were very hypocritical and vain. Those who had created their own divine systems and had many gods would call themselves the main gods of divine systems even though their divine power levels had yet to reach level 9. This sort of thing was not rare in the world of gods. There were even many gods who monopolized the power of faith in a large plane and never communicated with the outside world. At rank 6, they dared to call themselves main gods. This was the case in the Farron Plane that Grimm had visited before. It would have been fine if these small pantheons in remote areas kept hiding, but once they opened up to the world of gods, they would be attacked by the other powerful pantheons for overstepping the boundaries of divine force. This was why the Elven pantheon in the Farron Plane had not asked for help even after being invaded by the Ashen Witches for so long. The vast and complicated knowledge of the pantheon quickly flowed through Grimm's mind, causing him to lose hope in the following battles. It also made him feel extremely fortunate that he had been able to easily obtain a divine spark shard in the Magus world. However, the orc powerhouses could not understand the mentality of the great sorcerers. From the moment they saw the great sorcerers, the orc powerhouses were already in a frenzy of excitement. They could clearly see that the bodies and souls of the Grand Magi were entwined with numerous chains of laws, and the energy within their bodies had been suppressed to an extremely low level. Strike while they're down. The 5 Beastman experts immediately pounced forward while howling. These reckless fools, Grimm and the others cursed inwardly. They had not wanted to fight with these poor people who had nothing. However, the enemies had already pounced on them, and they had no choice but to fight. Thus, with hearts full of resentment, the Grand Wizards all went up to meet them. Grimm's opponent was the Beastmaster. Compared to the unstoppable sharpness of a sword saint, the unparalleled berserk of a beast spirit warrior, and the multiple casting abilities of a shaman, the Beastmaster was a rather mediocre combat profession. However, even though Grimm's idea was beautiful, things often didn't go as he imagined them to. This 2-meter-tall green orc, who did not have a very muscular build, immediately unsheathed the dark green vine whip at his waist the moment he saw Grimm. Asterisk crack crack crack. Asterisk as he waved the vine whip vigorously, the void of the plain crackled. At the same time, He muttered some mysterious and obscure incantations that Grim could not understand. In the next second, a dense spatial ripple appeared in the void of the plain, followed by a flash of silver light. Suddenly, a huge behemoth that was more than 10 meters tall appeared. This was a powerful war monster specially bred by the Orc Kingdom. Every time its 1-meter-long foot landed on the ground, the earth would tremble violently. Every part of its body was so thick and strong, especially its pair of ferocious red eyes that were filled with a bloodthirsty light. Its shoulders were 5 meters wide, and the deltoids on both sides bulged like small hills. The muscles under the fur could only be described as terrifying. At the end of its thick arms, there were terrifying claws that were over 100 inches long, and each of them was comparable to the dragon spears of the human dragon knights. The behemoth was terrifying because of its ferocity and fearlessness. The behemoth was known to be invincible in land battles, and when it matured, it could be strong enough to kill a dragon of the same level. Grim could not help but feel a little dizzy. He did not expect that the first thing that this unremarkable orc tamer summoned was such a violent and tyrannical behemoth. Looking at the silver light that flowed around its body, it seemed to be a mutated behemoth. It definitely had some strange power that outsiders did not know about. As soon as the behemoth was summoned, it stood up on its hind legs and let out a furious roar that shocked everyone present. Then, it lowered its body and charged towards Grim like a moving mountain. Before it could even get close, the rumbling heavy footsteps and the huge earthquake that seemed like the collapse of the world spread out. Even Damodar City, which was not far behind Grim, could not help but tremble. Grim did not hesitate to rush into the sky, and quickly flew to an altitude of 100 meters. However, just when he thought that he was safe, the huge behemoth that was more than 10 meters tall actually leaped into the air, and waved its sharp claws that were over 100 inches long at him. Damn, such a clumsy fellow could actually jump so high. Grim used a flame leap to an altitude of 200 meters, and only then did he manage to dodge the behemoth's claws. Sizzle, the air exploded and the void trembled. 10 crisscrossed air scratches appeared where Grim originally stood, and did not disappear for a long time. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out. Chapter 1462. Grim floated in the air. Since the battle had already begun, he did not intend to hide his strength anymore. However, he had only been in this plane for half an hour, and the AI chip's analysis of the laws of the plane had only completed 0.13%. Hence, within the realm of death, Grim could only display the basic combat power of a Grade 4 primary warrior. Faced with the enemy's provocation, Grim laughed coldly. Giant behemoth? The king of land battles? You're just an idiot who can't even fly, and you think you can challenge a great magus? Grim tried, but the pressure from the plane was too great. The surging magical flames that left his body were forced back into his body by the powerful force of the plane, and he was unable to transform into his flame giant form. Hence, he could only use his weakest human form to deal with the enemy in front of him. Grim flew in circles in the sky, dodging one large piece of mud or square rock after another. On the other hand, the series of explosive fireballs that he shot out were extinguished by the behemoth beast one after another, and the beast tamer behind him was not harmed at all. However, what worried Grim the most was that the beast master did not seem to be idle. He was still waving his rattan whip and chanting an incantation. He was still summoning. Grim could not help but feel surprised. Hence, Grim flew up to a height of 500 meters in the sky. He stabilized his body and raised his hands, summoning a large area of meteor rain. The enemy could block a single fireball, but now it was a rain of fire. Let's see how you block it. However, just as the meteor rain was about to descend, the beast master suddenly lashed out with his whip. With a loud crack, the entire battlefield shook strangely. In the next second, the wind whistled above Grim's head, and a golden claw wrapped in dazzling lightning appeared. Grim suddenly shouted, and a ball of golden light rushed out of his body, turning into a transparent membrane that covered a meter around his body. The golden claw stabbed into the transparent membrane, causing it to creak loudly. The membrane caved inwards, almost touching Grim's forehead. The violent thunderbolts that accompanied the sharp claws turned into rolling lightning and engulfed Grim's figure in an instant. After using the Book of Darkness to defend against this sudden attack, Grim suppressed his pounding heart. Flames of law condensed in his eyes, turning into two golden lines of fire that slashed at the golden claw. In the next second, a soul-stirring and sharp eagle cry rang out. The golden claw stretched out and retracted, taking advantage of the situation to dodge the slash of the golden line of fire. Then, it flapped its wings and soared into the sky, flying 100 meters away. At this moment, Grim finally saw the appearance of his new enemy through the fading lightning bolts. The Thunder Rock was actually a golden thunder rock. The Thunder Rock was an abnormally terrifying lightning-type magical beast. It was born with powerful lightning-type offensive skills. When it stood upright, it was only 5 meters tall, but its body was densely covered in golden feathers. When it spread its wings, it was 7 meters wide. The Thunder Rock's main attack method was its sharp claws that were like magic daggers and its extremely sharp, slender, curved beak. The feathers on the surface of its body floated with rolling lightning, turning into bolts of lightning as it attacked its enemy at close range. The Thunder Rock might not be one of the strongest among the Grade 4 magical beasts, but with its swift figure, fierce attacks, and lightning damage, it was still a rather difficult fellow to deal with. Damn it! This time, even Grim couldn't help but curse. The other party had actually summoned 2 Grade 4 magical beasts at once, and they were the kind that were not to be trifled with. This time, even Grim was having a hard time dealing with them. Caw, the Thunder Rock seemed to know that Grim was not to be trifled with. It flapped its golden wings and circled around the perimeter. Its sharp eagle eyes stared at Grim without blinking, and it madly attacked Grim with bolts of lightning. Do you think you're the only one who can summon? Grim's eyes turned fierce as he roared. The pages of the Book of Darkness in his hand quickly flipped, suddenly stopping at a certain page. In the next second, a green ball of light appeared from the Book of Darkness, and with a stretch of its hand, it turned into the shape of a wooden doll. Help me stop that Thunder Rock! Grim shouted at the plague-poisoned spirit Remy. The latter giggled and exploded with a bang. When he reappeared, he was already beside the Thunder Rock. Remy stomped his feet and beat his chest, spraying a mouthful of green poison gas on the right side of the Thunder Rock's body. The golden Thunder Rock was not to be outdone. It flapped its wings violently, and terrifying bolts of lightning instantly engulfed Remy's body. Both sides were heavily injured the moment they made their move. Caw, with a shrill cry, the golden Thunder Rock flapped its wings and fled, escaping from the range of the plague-poison cloud. In the blink of an eye, a large portion of the Thunder Rock's feathers on the right side of its body had been corroded by the poison gas, and its majestic and beautiful right wing had been reduced to a bare, fleshy wing. Even more frightening was the dark green spots covering the Thunder Rock's fleshy wing. It was obvious that the poison had already invaded its body. After devouring the toxic law crystal, the poison spirit Remy had already become a Tier 5 artifact spirit. His combat power and poison power had increased by several notches. Dealing with a Tier 4 intermediate Thunder Rock was naturally no problem. Although the plane of existence had similarly suppressed Remy's combat power, his Tier 5 basic attributes were still much higher than the Tier 4 Thunder Rock. The Thunder Rock's strength was overwhelming. As for the lightning attack, it only dimmed Remy's green body slightly. However, as the Book of Darkness's glow enveloped the Thunder Rock, it instantly healed Remy's injuries. The poison aura's power skyrocketed. The Beastman Tamer had not expected Grim to be able to control such a powerful poisonous artifact spirit. Seeing his Thunder Rock in such a state, he was naturally enraged. He urged the behemoth to leap into the air and attack Grim. Grim flew around in the air, dodging the behemoth's long claws and sharp blades before retaliating with a barrage of fire spells. Exploding fireball, meteor shower, doomsday volcano, raging flame storm, world of lava, core explosion, Armageddon. It had to be said that fire spells were the most powerful weapons on the battlefield. The fire's ability to spread and split, along with the inextinguishable flame's viciousness, made it so that Grim's enemies had to face the agony of not having a foothold after fighting for a while. Grim leisurely set up fire traps around the Beastman Tamer. Up until now, he had only displayed the might of his inextinguishable flames, but he had the flame mirror image firmly in his hands. He was waiting for an opportunity, a chance to kill in one blow. Once the Beastman revealed an opening, Grim would summon 3 flame clones from the Sea of Flames and use the most violent and brutal attacks to kill him on the spot. The battle was still going on. The Beastman Tamer was gradually losing ground. The Thunder Rock he summoned was clearly not a match for Remy, and although the other behemoth beast was valiant, it could not fly and could not attack the Fire Shaman who was flying all over the sky. Thus, the attacks became more and more urgent, and the Beastman finally became furious. No one knew what he did, but a dazzling divine spell suddenly shot out of his body. He then brandished a vine whip in one hand and a snake-shaped dagger in the other. He charged straight into the sky, ready to fight Grim in close combat. That was a good idea, but it was too impulsive. This showed that the Beastman Tamer had lost his reason after attacking for so long, and wanted to use his Beastman body to suppress Grim. Grim was elated, and he planned to use the flame mirror image to give him a head-on blow. However, under the AI chip scan, a frightening discovery made him immediately raise his guard. There was something wrong with that ball of golden light. At this moment, the Beastman Tamer's entire body was wrapped in a hazy golden radiance of divine force. It seemed to be some sort of mystical divine force. However, through the AI chip's full-channel scanning and deep vision, Grim was shocked to find that the Beastman Tamer's strength was silently increasing. Rank 5 unknowingly, the Beastman Tamer had become a rank 5 God-ranked Beastman, and Grim's strength was also increasing rapidly. Asterisk crack crack crack. Asterisk a few consecutive sounds of the whip being whipped could be heard. The vine whip that was made of an unknown material glowed with a golden luster, and as it lashed out in the air, it produced a soul-stirring explosion. As the whip passed, the void shattered, leaving behind black cracks that resembled spiderwebs in space. Meanwhile, the snake-shaped dagger in his left hand was also emitting a frightening divine energy fluctuation. The divine sharpness spell, the divine piercing spell, the divine laceration spell, and many other divine spells had turned a mere ordinary Tier 4 dagger into a killing weapon comparable to a top-tier Tier 4 divine weapon. The power of divinity and the fluctuation of divine power that was enough to annihilate the soul of a grand wizard made Grim feel shocked even though he was still far away. Bastard, this Beastman Tamer had been possessed by a ghost. With his rich knowledge, Grim immediately understood the reason, and without any hesitation, he turned around and ran. With the descent of a rank 5 beast god, and the foundation of a peak rank 4 Beastman Tamer, if Grim was at his peak, he would have been interested in fighting for a while. However, the analysis of the plane had not been completed, and he could only use a small portion of his strength. Clashing head-on with a powerful enemy at this time would be a grave disregard for his own life. Asterisk bang bang bang. Asterisk a series of flame leaps allowed Grim to escape from the Beastman Tamer's pursuit. His dense exploding fireballs bombarded the Beastman Tamer's golden body, causing it to sway. Although it could not break through the divine force barrier, it effectively hindered the Beastman Tamer's movements. The Beastman Tamer became even more furious. The whip in his hand moved faster and faster, continuously lashing at the silver behemoth and the golden thunder rock. Chapter 1463. Roar, the earth trembled, and the mountains changed color. The silver behemoth's fur had turned golden, and its body had grown a few times fatter. An elephant's body, a lion's head, golden fur, sharp claws. The golden beast's legs were 3 to 4 meters thick, and its body was overflowing with mysterious divine light. It could step on the void like a real thing, and it charged at Grim at high speed like a mountain. On the other side, the golden lightning rock's entire body was covered in lightning. Crackling sounds of terrifying electric currents lingered around its body, and tiny sparks flew in all directions. No matter where Lei Peng was, he could only see bolts of golden lightning descending from the sky within a radius of 1,000 meters, scorching everything in his field of vision black with electricity. Looking at its terrifying power and momentum, it felt like the god of thunder had descended upon the world. As for the god-level beast tamer, there was a trace of lofty and otherworldly majesty rippling in his body. It was as if a god had suddenly descended into his body and was using his body as a carrier, coldly looking at everything around him. Rank 5. Unknowingly, he had already risen to the 5th level, becoming a god-level beast tamer through and through. Damn it, it's the god's vanquish spell. Grim completely gave up on killing his opponent and changed to guerrilla tactic. He started jumping around madly, and every time he jumped, he would fly at high speed and flood his opponent's position with fire spells. Unfortunately, the divine shield popped out of his opponent's body and blocked all the attack. There was nothing Grim could do about it. Divine Shield and Divine Shockwave were the most common abilities of extraordinary divinity. The Divine Power Shield created by Divine Power had the powerful ability to resist all known damage. It could make a god immune to mind effects, poison, hypnosis, paralysis, dizziness, and diseases. It could also make a god immune to the special effects of any elemental spells. From the outside, the divine shield looked like a layer of transparent eggshell. However, such a thin layer of light managed to block all of Grim's attacks. Even the law effect of the eternal flame could not penetrate it, let alone the burning and exploding effects of ordinary flames. However, even with the indestructible eggshell, the god-level beast tamer could not catch up to Grim's flying figure. After all, the profession of beast tamer mainly relied on summoning beasts to fight, and their own offensive magic and confinement magic were pitifully few, and they also lacked the necessary means of mobility. Therefore, in the situation where he could not get close to Grim's body, he could not hurt Grim at all even with his violent strength and sharp physical attack. In his rage, the beast tamer could only continue waving his whip, commanding the golden behemoth and Thunder Rock to attack Grim. Grim wasn't the only battlefield around Danmador. 5 orc powerhouses versus 5 great sorcerers. Both sides fought and killed each other according to their own preferences. They simply turned the surroundings of this orc city upside down and turned it into a complete mess. In the end, both sides were truly enraged, and they didn't care about the terrifying damage that might be brought to the surrounding environment. The first to be unable to endure the harsh environment of this plane were the 2 Grade 6 powerhouses. The great sorcerer Feng Li casually tore open the plane's space and took the lead to enter the void. The Grade 6 orc powerhouse also followed with a fierce look on his face. The two of them were no longer suppressed outside the plane's barrier, and they both brought out the terrifying strength of a Grade 6 powerhouse to fight. Although the specifics of the battle were unknown, they could still sense the terrifying scene of the world collapsing and the end of the world coming from the huge crack in the void. Shock waves from the battle swept out from the crack, and wherever they went, even the Grade 5 powerhouses who were engaged in a life-and-death battle had to retreat. Otherwise, if they were careless and got caught up in it, their opponents might seize the opportunity to attack fiercely. The one who fought the most ferociously was the Grade 5 Orc Sword Saint. After using the God-subduing spell, his strength had skyrocketed from the peak of Grade 4 to Grade 5. At the same time, the terrifying sword aura that was already abnormally sharp also became several times more powerful, and the area of attack became even more shocking. He stood proudly in the void, and every time he slashed out with his sword, the tip of his sword would condense a pitch-black sword aura with cutting power comparable to a spatial fragment, and then sweep through the entire sky with an unstoppable momentum. Wherever the pitch-black sword aura passed, regardless of what it was, it would be instantly sliced in two. Not to mention an ordinary elemental shield, even a physique refinement sorcerer who had condensed an immortal body would not be able to withstand such a terrifying sword aura. The one fighting the Orc Sword Saint was the only female sorcerer in the team, as well as the only physique refinement sorcerer, Catherine. He swayed his bloated body in the air like a flying divine pig. His thick and fat fists punched out consecutively. Wherever the wind from his fists passed, ripples would appear in the void, and anything that was caught in the ripples would be instantly crushed into minced meat and powder. Every time the sword aura struck her, Catherine would look up at the sky and let out a soul-stirring cry of agony. However, when the terrifying sword aura that could cut through anything hit her body, it would only make muffled sounds like cowhide being cut, and the damage was absorbed by her unique physique. Meanwhile, the Orc Sword Saint was like a leaf drifting in the wind from her fists, advancing and retreating suddenly, making it difficult for others to capture his messy footsteps and ghostly figure. The Sword Saint's sword aura, Catherine's wind from her fists, just like that, they went back and forth, fighting in the void of the plain. At first glance, the attacks from both sides did not seem to be out of the ordinary, just like two children blindly gesticulating there, with no visible damage at all. However, when the wind from the fists or the sword aura that was slashed out landed on the ground, it would instantly blast a deep pit with a radius of 100 meters, or leave a 1,000-meter-long chasm of sword aura that was unfathomably deep. Just like that, the two sides fought in the void, moving further and further away, until they reached the end of the sky. On the other side of the battlefield, the Bao family sorcerer, who wore a golden ring on his head, and had a human body and a rat head, also displayed the terrifying might of a great sorcerer. He was like a nimble rat that could move freely underground, using the terrain to avoid the attacks of the beast soul warrior, and then suddenly emerging from the ground beside him, using an endless stream of stone spears to attack his opponent in a frenzy. The beast soul warrior had been toyed with to the point of going berserk, and a terrifying phantom of a magical beast that was over 100 meters tall appeared behind him. With the support of the powerful beast soul, the orc warrior's every punch and kick contained a supreme force that was 100 times stronger than his own strength. With a punch, the heavens and earth changed color. With a stomp, the earth collapsed. However, no matter how the beast soul warrior destroyed the surrounding mountains and ravaged the entire land, it still could not force the Bao family sorcerer out. Instead, the Bao family sorcerer's divine force shield trembled as he suddenly attacked with extremely simple stone spears. In comparison, the last bloodline sorcerer Tunchai was unusually brave. He actually transformed into a giant octopus monster and clashed with the orc shaman. Although the orc shaman could be classified as an elemental spellcaster, he had inherited the fighting style of the orc race. When he fought, he would charge forward, and his fists would land on flesh. As for the totem pole that he had casually tossed aside, it was overflowing with a colorful halo. If the octopus monster accidentally entered the range of the halo, it would immediately be affected by all kinds of strange binding effects. Whether it was a quicksand trap, a thorny entanglement, an earth tremor, or an anti-gravity force field. In short, every totem pole seemed to have a completely different divine spell power, making it impossible to defend against. Apart from these restraining and binding effects, there were also many strange elemental spells. Although the attack power was far from being as strong as that of a law-defying sorcerer, there were still traces of divine spell power within it, enough to break through the protection of laws and cause considerable damage to a great sorcerer. The battle between the powerful orcs and the great sorcerers shook the heavens and the earth, causing people to tremble in fear. The Magi who had invaded the Cure Plain all hid in Damodar City, setting up a large defensive spell formation from within. Relying on their combined strength, they were able to withstand the waves of attack. Some of the low-ranked Magi who were witnessing a battle at the transcendent rank for the first time were dumbstruck. It was as if they were watching an unimaginable illusion, and they could not help but shiver in fear as they hid in the light barrier. This was the first time they had experienced the terror of a transcendent creature. As Grimm fought with the god-tier beast tamer, he secretly scanned the entire battlefield. Every orc warrior and every great magus was on the AI chip's list of data. Judging from the current situation of the battle, the orcs had the absolute initiative and almost dominated the entire battlefield. The great Magi who were facing them were barely resisting, doing their best to avoid a head-on clash. The reason for this was because the orcs were fighting in their own territory. The bodies of peak rank 4 orc warriors were completely compatible with the Cure Plane, and they could unleash 100% of their battle prowess. With the support of the Plane's will and the God's Vanquish spell, they could unleash 200% of their power after reaching rank 5. Compared to them, the great Magi were in a more miserable state. Having just descended to this plane, they could not break free from the suppression of the plane's power on their bodies and souls. Every great magus had their hands and feet tied up, fighting against someone of the same rank who was bursting with battle intent. One could only imagine how dangerous and terrifying it was. If not for the fact that the grand sorcerers present today were all people with outstanding battle prowess, it was likely that at this moment there would have been terrible casualties that no one could bear to look at. In this kind of battlefield, Grimm naturally would not go all out. Due to the suppression of the plane, he could not transform into the flaming giant that could unleash his full power. He could only contend with the enemy in his weakest human form. Chapter 1464. Since the leader, Feng Li, had no intention of using the rotting root water, the great Magi's side was destined to be at a disadvantage in today's battle. After fighting for half a day, even Tunchai, who had transformed into a giant octopus, could no longer endure the suppression within the plane. He and his opponent escaped the plane's barrier one after the other. The other two pairs followed suit, moving the battlefield to the void beyond the world. Grimm hesitated for a moment, but did not follow them and escape to the void. Firstly, while the god-ranked Beastmaster before him was difficult to deal with, it was not to the extent that he had to transform. Secondly, the most important magus in the mission was still in the camp behind him. If everyone left and another Beastman powerhouse came, the mission would be ruined. Hence, Grimm did not go far, bringing the god-ranked Beastmaster and the 2 summoned beasts that were 5 ranks above him to circle around Damodar City. On the surface, it seemed like the battle was earth-shattering and intense, but in reality, it was more daunting than dangerous. Neither side suffered too much damage. As he fought, he secretly monitored his opponent's strength. From the feedback from the AI chip, he could see that the god-ranked Beastmaster's strength was slowly declining. After all, he was different from Grimm. Grimm was a true grade 5 magus, but his strength was suppressed by the power of the plane, which was why he was in such a sorry state. On the other hand, the god-ranked Beastmaster was only a peak grade 4 orc. He had relied on the projection of the god's ascension spell to reach grade 5. Even with the protection of divine force, using grade 5 strength with a grade 4 body was extremely taxing on his body. The battle lasted for a day and night, and even the god-ranked Beastmaster was at his limit. Of course, it was not that the beast god's subordinates were weak, but that the Beastmaster's main body could not hold on any longer. Just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion, ripples appeared on the plane's barrier. Spatial cracks opened up, and the orcs and Magi who had escaped to the void to fight returned. However, compared to before, they were in a much more sorry state. Bloodstains and scars could be seen all over their bodies. Even with their strength, they still couldn't get rid of these wounds, which was enough to show that their injuries were extremely serious or that there was some kind of strange energy attached to the wounds. Only under such circumstances could such obvious marks appear on their bodies. At this point, both sides were clearly exhausted, and their energy had fallen to a dangerous level. They had never thought of perishing together, so they could only give up and prepare to fight again in the future. The 5 orcs had come in a menacing manner, but it was clear that they did not have much to gain, so they could only leave resentfully. And the few great shamans looked at each other, no longer speaking, chose to return to Damodar City to recuperate. The Tier 6 great sorcerer Feng Li seemed to have gone all out, losing a third of his smoky body. However, the orc powerhouse didn't fare too well either. His body was riddled with wounds that were shrouded in terrifying black gas. He couldn't heal them on his own. Meanwhile, among the Tier 5 great sorcerers, the one who suffered the most damage was Tunchai, who had transformed into a giant octopus. Most of the octopus tentacles on his body had been destroyed. The wounds on his tentacles continuously spewed out ink-like black gas, and he looked extremely wretched. Seeing that the few great shamans had returned victorious, the Magi of Damodar City hurriedly rushed out and welcomed them into the city, arranging for them to settle down in a clean room. In order to treat their injuries, a large number of healers were gathered, using all sorts of methods to disperse the strange energy attached to their wounds. As the attacks of the orcs were mixed with the terrifying divine power of the beast god, it was extremely difficult to disperse it, and the great shamans suffered greatly because of this. Fortunately, the orc powerhouses weren't much stronger than the Magi. After this battle, the plane wouldn't have to worry about the existence of superpowers for at least 10 days to half a month. As if receiving the assurance of the great shaman Feng Li, Damodar City, which had been silent for many days, immediately became lively again. Large numbers of Magi crossed the teleportation formation from various secondary planes, and under the command of Merola, they rushed out of Damodar City and began to attack the various orc cities in the Cure Plain. For a time, the interior of the Cure Plain was once again filled with the flames of war, and everywhere was plunged into a difficult and bloody battle. Grimm and the others did not care at all about the strategy and tactics of the Magi attacking the Cure Plain. These things were basically planned and implemented by Merola and a few other leaders of the Magi army, while the great shamans were only responsible for overseeing the rear, ensuring that the attacking forces would not be attacked by the superpowers of the orcs. Therefore, while his companions were recuperating in the city, Grimm leisurely went to explore a few of the more well-known ancient ruins and realm of absolute death in the Gu-Air realm. Of course, for a Tier 5 great sorcerer like Grimm, it was impossible for him to find a desperate situation in a plane that could kill him. Hence, the more dangerous the place was, the more interested Grimm was. Cure Plain, Holy Dragon Valley. It was a warm afternoon with the sun shining brightly. The Holy Dragon Valley, which was usually quiet and peaceful, suddenly became lively and noisy. A large team of wyverns came from the east, traversing thousands of miles and crossing the Bamese mountain range before descending at the entrance of the Holy Dragon Valley, which was rarely visited by humans. The team was made up of 100 wyverns, and each wyvern carried 2 Magi on its back. Roughly speaking, there were no less than 200 Magi in this team, which could be considered a very powerful force. The leader of the team gently reined in the abnormally thick Wyvern King, holding a crude map drawn on papyrus in his hand. He compared the direction of the mountains and the marked locations with the scene in front of him, and could not help but show a hint of joy on his face. He hurriedly bowed and smiled. "Sir, we've arrived. This is the legendary Holy Dragon Valley." The leader of the team was a rank 4 body refinement magus, who wore a magus robe and carried a pair of strange copper hammers on his back. His many years of physical refinement had naturally caused his body to carry an unnatural and ferocious aura. However, no matter how tyrannical he was, he had to be careful in front of this terrifying lord behind him. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. After all, he had personally witnessed this lord's terrifying battle prowess. "Oh, we've arrived?" Grim, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and scanned the area below him. When he saw the low-lying valley hidden in the lush forest not far away, his expression relaxed slightly. "Since we've arrived, let's go down and settle down. We'll enter the valley in a while." "Yes." The leader of the team bowed in acknowledgement, then turned around and bellowed, "Go down and prepare to set up camp." "Yes. Yes." Numerous replies immediately rang out from the surroundings. Following that, the twin-legged wyverns stretched out their necks and roared, flapping their gigantic wings that were covered in scales. They pushed aside the branches of the tall ancient trees and found a slightly spacious area in the forest to land. Wild twin-legged wyverns were considered rank 1 magical beasts once they matured. Though their individual battle prowess was at the bottom, they relied on their terrifying bite strength, the venom in their teeth, powerful flying abilities, and the fact that they lived in groups. These were the few magical beasts that were difficult to deal with. The twin-legged wyverns in front of them had all undergone bloodline refinement by high-ranked magi, and their basic battle prowess had jumped from rank 1 to rank 2. As for the twin-legged wyvern king, there was a crown of bones growing out of its skull, and its strength was as high as mid-rank 3. With this kind of strength, he would probably be a king-level power in any region. However, in this team, it was only a flying mount that the Magi had enslaved, and its position was not much higher than those mindless wizard beasts. Especially now that it was carrying that terrifying human magus on its back, this made it even more fearful, not daring to have any disrespectful thoughts or actions. Asterisk thump thump thump, asterisk as the twin-legged wyverns landed one after another, the strong winds from the wyverns' flapping wings swirled the fallen leaves and dried branches into the air, causing the entire forest to become crowded and messy. One by one, the astute and valiant magi jumped off the backs of the wyverns and began to form small teams of magi, spreading out to scout the surroundings. The magi that remained in the forest summoned their wizard beasts and puppets, and began to level the ground and push down the ancient trees that were in the way, preparing for the next few days to set up camp. When the twin-legged wyvern king was driven away by the leading magus, it steadily landed in the middle of the forest. A camp had already begun to take shape here. Those who leveled the ground leveled it, those who set up tents, those who searched for water sources, those who prepared food. Everything was done in an orderly and methodical manner. Without even needing the orders of the leading magus, a few small teams of magi passed through the forest and began to explore the depths of the Holy Dragon Valley, making preliminary preparations for the upcoming exploration. The twin-legged wyvern king meekly crouched down, using its wings and skull to create a small staircase that allowed Grim to easily step onto the ground. "My lord, you can take a short rest in the camp and eat some food. I'm sure those exploration teams will be able to bring us some useful information soon." The leader of the Magi stood beside Grim attentively and cautiously gave his opinion. Although this was only a personal mission of the Lord in front of him, if he could form a good relationship with him, he would definitely be rewarded handsomely. Chapter 1465. This was a secluded valley in the boundless mountain range. The ancient trees in the forest were tall and strong, and the open palm leaf fans and large umbrellas easily occupied an area of about an acre. The surroundings were also filled with tall mountains, crisscrossing ravines, and the chirping of birds and insects. Honestly speaking, it was hard to believe that this was the first time one had seen such a beautiful place. It was actually the famous place of death in the entire plain, the Holy Dragon Valley. This was the forbidden place that was rumored to have a dragon graveyard, the Holy Dragon Valley. In the dense forest of the valley, a team of 5 sorcerers was making their way forward with great difficulty, cutting their way through thistles and thorns. The one in charge of opening the path was a rank 2 magus called Ernst. He wielded 2 sharp, long and shiny blazing war blades. Every time he slashed, he would chop the bushes or vampiric vines that were crawling all over the ground into pieces. Then, he would burn them with raging flames, and a wide, flat road would appear in front of them. After the fire, the mutated magic plants that were hiding in the bushes were exposed. They hurriedly pulled out their roots from the soil and shook their strange bodies, intending to hide at the side. Unfortunately, their movements were too slow. Before they could escape from the path of ashes, Ernst's terrifying foot, which was heavier than Mount Tai and harder than a boulder, came crashing down. Creak, the soundless screams of the mutated magic plants before their deaths resounded in the forest. This purely spiritual scream spread far and wide, and the surrounding forest immediately responded with a buzzing sound. As if sensing that this group of intruders was not to be trifled with, the man-eating flowers, vampiric vines, and soul-sucking grasses that were hiding in the bushes and vines began to flee to the sides, trying their best to avoid the direction of the magus team. Hearing the densely packed soil and the sounds of tiny vines escaping, the rank 3 magus in the middle of the team revealed a look of disgust. This is indeed the forbidden place of the plain. There are actually so many forbidden life forms hidden here. Humph, Ernst, don't hold back against these demonized brats. After saying this, the magus team leader turned around and asked softly, Sina, did you discover anything? Sina was the only female magus in the team, and she was also a spirit warlock. She wore a moon-white, tight-fitting robe with a wide belt that accentuated her slender waist and towering breasts. Compared to other wizards, Sina's skin was fairer and smoother. Her long silver hair was draped over her shoulders, and there was a sparkling and translucent soul crystal in the middle of her forehead. East. Head towards that precipice. I can sense that the death aura there is much thicker than the surroundings. Psionic warlocks were proficient in mind-divergent techniques, so their mind power was naturally the most sensitive and powerful. Most of the time, they were able to discover anomalies that others couldn't. Therefore, in the absence of a prophet in the team, the psionic warlock could still act as a human radar and exert his powerful mental power. Did you hear that? Advance towards the precipice. Following the wizard captain's order, the team of 5 continued to advance, slowly approaching the 1,000-meter-tall precipice hidden in the depths of the forest. The terrain here was very strange. First, it was a low-lying valley that stretched for nearly 100 miles, then slowly rose to form a gentle slope. At the end of the forest was a 1,000-meter-tall precipice. The surface of the precipice was so flat that it looked like it had been cut by a knife. Green vines and strange flowers crawled all over the precipice, and the top of the precipice was a snow-covered mountain peak. The scenery here was beautiful and pleasant, and the mountains and ancient trees were verdant. It was hard to associate this place with the terrifying Holy Dragon Valley of legends. However, behind this beautiful scenery that was full of vitality and picturesque scenery, Sina could sense a lingering cold aura lingering around the team, lingering for a long time. Insignificant tricks. Come out. When the team was not far from the precipice, Sina's eyes suddenly sharpened. The soul crystal in the middle of her forehead suddenly shone with a dazzling light, turning into a ball of white light that shot towards a tall, towering ancient tree beside the team. Arg! A scream that occurred purely on the spiritual level resounded in everyone's mind. In the next second, the earth shook and swelled, the soil tumbled and cracked. The tall ancient tree trembled and rose from the ground, pulling out thick, black, snake-like roots from the soil, and began to move with a squeaking sound. A large piece of the wrinkled bark that was blasted by the white light was peeled off, revealing a scene that made people's hair stand on end. Even if the bark of an ordinary ancient tree was peeled off, what was revealed inside would only be a wooden trunk, veins, and the like. But after the surface of the withered giant tree cracked, what flowed out of it was a putrid, pungent, and rotten black blood. Looking through the gap, what they saw was a horrendous, wriggling corpse. The thick trunk of the withered giant tree, which was tens of meters tall, was filled with human corpses that were soaked in sticky black blood. As if sensing that it had been exposed, the withered tree began to shake its body. Countless twisted branches and vines condensed into a large hand, which viciously slapped towards Ernst, who was at the front of the group. At the same time, countless tall ancient trees in the surrounding lush forest began to tremble and move. The terrifying scene of tall figures rising from the ground could be seen everywhere in the forest. "We've entered the enemy's ambush. Defend immediately!" The leader of the Magi immediately shouted, and a dazzling, intense elemental light rose from his body. "Sina, report our position to the camp and ask them to send reinforcements. Everyone else, prepare for battle." In the next moment, the sound of elemental spells exploded in the boundless forest. About 10 miles away in the camp in the forest, the leader, the rank 3 Magus Callum, slowly rotated the snake eye ring on his right pinky, ending the connection with a spell in the distance. He casually ordered 10 elite Magi to rush into the forest to carry out the rescue. Then, he turned to Grim, who was resting with his eyes closed, and said softly, "My lord, the team in front has already made contact with the enemy's outer perimeter. I reckon we'll be able to find the dragon tomb soon. All right, got it?" Grim nodded indiscernibly, and continued to meditate with his eyes closed. With the AI chip's powerful data processing abilities, Grim had already analyzed the laws of this plane. From that moment onwards, he would no longer be affected by the pervasive suppression of the plane. Though he would still be suppressed by the power of the plane when he used strength at the peak of rank 4, it was much better than when he had to fight enemies with half his body bound. This way, Grim would have the ability to protect himself in the plane. Even if they were besieged by multiple enemies and victory was impossible, there was no problem in escaping safely. With this layer of protection, Grim had decided to make a move. He had taken advantage of the gap between the two sides to come out and explore the plain, wantonly plundering it. With his current identity, it was naturally impossible for him to explore alone like in the past. The commander of Damodar City, Merlora, did not hesitate to send Grim an elite team of Magi for him to command at will. Hence the current scene. Grim sat quietly in the camp, waiting while his subordinates scattered into the forest to search for the legendary Holy Dragon Valley. According to the information Grim had, the so-called Holy Dragon Valley was just a dragon's tomb with a long history. A long time ago, there seemed to have been some ancient dragons in the plain. However, as the orcs gradually took over the plain, the dragons could no longer endure the constant harassment and covetousness of the orcs, and were forced to move out of the plain. However, they could not move the dragon graveyard that had been around for generations, and could only seal it and hide it in the Holy Dragon Valley. As thousands of years passed, a terrifying Dracolic appeared there, and it quickly became one of the more famous and powerful beings in the plain. Even though there was only one peak rank 4 Dracolic in the dragon's tomb, it relied on the countless traps and graveyard guards to stop the orcs from clearing it out. If there were still living dragons in the Holy Dragon Valley, the orcs would definitely not let go of this treasure trove that could show off their might. However, if it was a group of undead dragons, then the orcs would lose interest and become dispirited. The plain did not have the advanced alchemy skills of the Magus world, which could refine dragon bones and dragon crystals into powerful killing weapons. The orcs were all muscleheads, and even their brains were full of muscles. What methods did they have to deal with those bones? It was because of this reason that the ancient dragon tomb was able to be preserved. However, this place that the orcs were not interested in was a treasure trove for Magi like Grim. Hence, as soon as he heard the news, Grim ran over immediately. The 5th squad has already made contact with the guards outside the ancient tomb. the 1st and 4th squads have arrived at the scene to provide support. The elite squad has also arrived at the battlefield and are clearing out the guards. The 2nd squad has broken through the inner defense line and found the entrance to the underground tunnel to the dragon's tomb. Magus Derek has brought 3 of his subordinates into the tunnel and are clearing out the magic traps inside. A Rank 3 Dragon Soul has appeared in the tunnel, and the battle at the front lines is extremely intense. Emergency, emergency. A large number of high-ranked dragon graveyard guards have appeared at the front lines, requesting for more elite magi graveyard guards. Hearing this name, Grimm suddenly opened his eyes, and a trace of joy appeared on his face. Since the graveyard guards had appeared, this meant that the Magus squad had found the true location of the dragon's tomb. Let's go. Bring all the members and destroy this dragon's tomb in one go, then leave as soon as possible. We don't want the orcs to hear about this and come looking for trouble. With these words, Grimm's hand flashed, and the Book of Darkness silently appeared. Remy, you'll be the vanguard. Yes. Chapter 1466. By the time Grimm arrived at the outskirts of the battlefield, the battle had already ended. In the vast forest, withered ancient trees were lying all over the place, as well as the corpses of magic beasts that outnumbered them by more than 10 times. Most of them had been smashed into smithereens, and many of them had even been hammered into purplish-black meat paste. The entire battlefield was a mess, with grotesquely shaped corpses and traces of berserk spells everywhere. Grimm was dressed in a tight-fitting black leather jacket, with an exquisite robe decorated with purplish-black patterns draped over it. 2 strands of dark red hair flowed out from his hood, accentuating his sturdy physique and valiant figure. Grimm stepped on the ground that was shrouded in black smoke, crossing the battlefield step by step. After walking for another 5 kilometers, he saw a huge cave hidden behind dense vines and green plants at the bottom of a precipice. It was a dark and serene cave. The ancient tomb's passageway extended downwards, and one could not see the end of it. The Magi in front of him had already placed illuminating stones on the walls on both sides of the passageway. The faint milky white light dispelled the darkness in the cave, illuminating every inch of the space beneath their feet. Along the way, they could see the terrifying remnants of magic traps everywhere. The bottom of the passageway made rustling sounds as they stepped on it. Apart from dust and gravel, there seemed to be some grayish-white bone powder. After walking for a short while, they arrived at a small cave. The space here was slightly more spacious, and they could see some things that stood out from the crowd. Skeletal dragon remains, a large number of skeletal dragon remains. The ground and walls were filled with the remnants of a tragic battle. Skeletal dragons that were no lower than rank 3 had been torn apart by the Magi, and their bones were scattered all over the battlefield. In a corner, Grimm saw the remains of a skeletal dragon that was close to dissolving. The remains were soaked in a sticky and smelly green liquid, slowly corroding and melting. From the looks of it, it seemed to be Remy's method of attack. Grimm casually picked up a meter-long dragon bone. The blue light from the AI chip in his eyes scanned it, and the basic data of the dragon bone was obtained. Beat. The 3rd spine on the right side of the low-rank bone dragon's back. Hardness. Tier 2 Ductility. Tier 1 Magic Resistance. Tier 2 Elemental Precipitation. Tier 1. Initial conclusion. This bone dragon was a Tier 2 white dragon before its death. It had low intelligence, and its dragon breath was mainly icy wind breath. Also, the bone dragon's cooking method was simple and crude, and its skill level was that of an apprentice. Due to the inappropriate cooking method, the bone dragon lost all the magic and skills it had when it was alive, and its basic combat power was reduced by 40%. Ugh, it seemed like the AI chip's evaluation of the Dracolic was really low. That was true. A dragon lich that was secluded from the outside world would have to do everything by himself and figure things out from the beginning without any source of knowledge. It was normal for such a situation to occur. Leaving the dragon bones behind, Grim led a group of elite subordinates to the end of the cave. There were 3 identical passageways here, and above the passageways there were even 3 rather strange symbols written with white bone. A young magus was waiting at the entrance of the cave. Upon seeing Grim and the rest, he hurriedly bowed in greeting. "They've already gone in? How's the exploration going?" Grim asked indifferently. "My lord, Lord Remy took the middle tunnel, Lord Karl took the left, and Lord Tahir took the right. There's no report yet," the young magus replied respectfully. The young magus's face flushed red at being able to interact with a supreme magus at such a close distance. It was obvious that he was extremely excited. Grim scanned the surroundings, and a tyrannical spiritual force swept out from his body. In an instant, it filled the 3 tunnels in front of him. It was scorching, restless, and contained traces of violence as well as a faint aura of arrogance. The mental wave ignored the obstruction of the rock walls and the existence of the protective force field. It flowed through the entire tunnel of the ancient tomb like flowing mercury. In an instant, it passed through the few teams that were struggling to move forward and rushed into the depths of the ancient tomb. There, a huge restrictive spell was triggered, and a cold and silent spiritual force shot into the sky, stopping Grim's spiritual force from extending further. "No matter where you're from, powerhouse from another world, please leave. This is the ancient tomb of the dragon, the resting place of the ancient dragons. We will not accept any visitors from outside the dragon race. No matter what your purpose is, please leave." 2 enormous spiritual wills collided in the space of the ancient tomb. The great power that couldn't be vented even shook the entire precipice, causing dust to fall down from the passage of the ancient tomb. "Leave? Hee, after I've plundered everything here, I'll naturally leave. However, before I leave, I hope that you can accompany me. I'm currently lacking some suitable subordinates, and I think you're very suitable." Grim chuckled as he strode through the winding underground tunnels. As if enraged by Grim's arrogance, the cold and silent psychic wave suddenly roared and gathered all of its power to attack Grim through the air. "Humph, how dare you!" Grim snorted in anger, and an incomparably violent and scorching willpower left his body without reservation, colliding head-on with the in-death willpower that was pouncing towards him. Dong, a formless shockwave spread out from the spiritual force, enveloping all the magi and living beings in the vicinity of the ancient tomb. No matter where they were or what their rank was, the moment the spiritual shockwave reached them, their bodies trembled. Their spiritual will became chaotic, and thin snakes of blood flowed out of their eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Some of the magi below grade 2 even fainted on the spot. Even the Tier 4 sorcerer, who was following closely behind Grim, had to grimace in pain to endure the unbearable mental shock. Grade 5. You're Grade 5? Naturally, the weaker party would always be at a disadvantage in this kind of clash. Grim's spiritual force had long since reached the level of materialization. How could a peak Grade 4 Dracolic in a remote corner of the world compare to him? It was only at this moment that the careless Dracolic finally felt Grim's true strength. Grade 5. The intruder was actually a Grade 5 Great Sorcerer. No matter how regretful the Dracolic was, Grim continued to stride towards the depths of the tomb. Before the Dracolic's hoarse voice could die down, another exclamation erupted in the blink of an eye. "Bastard, who are you? Get the hell out of the ancient dragon's tomb." After a few strange explosions, the Dracolica's mental undulations weakened, and he hissed, "Impossible. How is this possible? Even your contracted servant is a Grade 5 Great Sorcerer. I'll fight you to the death." At this moment, the mental ripples suddenly stopped. What replaced it was Poison Spirit Layme's strange and sinister secret message. "Master, I've already beaten that Dracolic to the ground. You should hurry over and take a look." Oh? Something that could make Poison Spirit Remy so surprised was definitely not an ordinary item. Grimm was filled with curiosity as he entered the depths of the dragon's ancient tomb at lightning speed. After passing through a layer of strange, dusky light, Grimm instantly arrived in a strange space that was almost independent of the gale plane. This was the true ancient dragon's tomb. In this vast space, the sky was dusky and filled with a cold, gloomy aura of death. The ground was pitch black, and the soil here had been permeated by a dense aura of death, turning it into a death land. If the soil here was taken out and scattered into any tomb, it would subtly transform the corpses there into mid to high level undead. On the ground there were hundreds of dragon skeletons. These dragon skeletons were of different sizes, with the smallest being only a dozen meters long, and the largest being as large as a mountain that stretched as far as the eye could see. Although they were of different races when they were alive, their corpses and souls were all buried here after they died. Hence, the density of the aura of death here was simply astounding. As if sensing the presence of living beings, the dense aura of death in the ancient dragon's tomb began to surge. From time to time, wisps of grayish-white mist would transform into the image of a furious dragon, letting out bone-chilling deep dragon roars. The entire tomb seemed to come to life with Grimm's arrival. At the center of the tomb, on a square dragon bone altar, a Dracolic was lying on the ground in agony. The bones on its worm-eaten body had burst, and its joints were sprayed with sticky green liquid. Could not move at all. Surrounded by the green fog, the Dracolic was still struggling, but it could not break free from the strange creature that was stepping on it, Remy the poison spirit. Was this the Dracolic that had collided with his mind power? Grimm could not help but glance at it with great interest. This was a pure-blooded Dracolic. From its appearance, the Dracolic looked like a large lizard with its body standing upright. The dragon lich's crooked spine made it so that it was only 2 meters tall. It dragged a dark-colored bone dragon tail behind it, and its long and narrow head was hidden in the gray fog, making it difficult to see its ugly and ferocious true face. As a powerful spellcaster that had basically degenerated its melee abilities, the Dracolica's mind power had been strengthened several times. Unlike ordinary liches, Dracolics were mostly made of dragon bones, so they basically retained the Dragon Clan's spells from when they were alive. Although its undead body could no longer use draconic magic, it allowed it to master most of the dark spells without a teacher. Curse spells, instant death spells, dark summoning spells. As long as it was a spell that was powered by negative energy, it could easily control it, and it could even reach the level of a master. Chapter 1467. The gigantic ancient dragon's tomb had been completely occupied by the magi that had swarmed in. Sporadic battles were still going on outside. Some of the newly awakened dragon tomb guards and dragon souls were invincible to normal grave robbers, but to the well-prepared elite wizards, they were just a bunch of high-grade undead creatures that were hard to deal with. Soul-reaping spell, war spirit spell, death barrier, anti-magic field, protection against evil. As an elite wizard, there were simply too many ways to deal with these old antiques who had been asleep for thousands of years, and whose brains were a little messed up. If they couldn't do it, they could also use some spells that were powered by positive energy to inflict great damage on them. However, in order to maximize their profits, no one was willing to waste the high-grade materials that represented magic crystals and turn them into dust. Grimm ate the meat, and the rest of the soup went to the wizards who followed him. The dragon's ancient tomb wasn't small by any means. Hundreds of giant dragon skeletons were buried in a strange space with a radius of tens of miles. Some of the dragon skeletons were half buried in the soil, with traces of the passage of time on them. Some had fused with the mountain rocks, turning into a grayish-white fossil-like appearance. But without exception, in this magical space, their skeletons were overflowing with a dense aura of death that was so dense that it was almost solid. The dragon tomb guards formed from their skeletons, and the specter dragons formed from the dragon souls became the main obstacles for the wizards to plunder the spoils of war. Groups of wizards skillfully took out soul-reaping wands or war spirit scrolls and tied up the phantom dragons with elemental chains. Then, they carefully put them into soul crystals or soul urns. As for the rampaging dragon tomb guards, they could only rely on the anatomy refinery sorcerers who were covered with layers of defensive enchantments or anti-magic force fields to break them up. Every time a guardian's body was broken into pieces, the magi would burst into cheers. Then, they would quickly pick up the high-ranked giant dragon skeletons one by one. While the sorcerers were collecting their spoils of war, Grim and Remy were circling around the small dragon bone altar, sizing it up. For some reason, Grim had a strange feeling that he had missed something important. As a great sorcerer, there was almost no possibility of his perception being wrong. As long as his heart felt something, it would inevitably indicate that something unfavorable was happening outside of his perception. It was just that Grim did not practice prophecy, so he could not determine the source of this unknown danger. However, this matter had arisen because of the exploration of the dragon tomb. It was certain that this dragon lich was the culprit. Grim picked up the dragon lich whose limbs were about to be melted by the venom and raised it in front of his eyes. He stared coldly at the dragon lich's narrow and fierce green eyes and said sternly, "Little guy, don't play tricks in front of me, or I'll make you." Before he could finish, Grim's voice stopped abruptly. The AI chip's warning sounded in his mind. Beep, faith mark detected in the depths of target's soul, faith waymark? Grim's heart skipped a beat as information about this flooded his mind. Faith waymarks were a special method of spatial positioning, and were a sign that a devout believer was noticed by the god they worshipped. Through the waymark, the god could sense the life and death of their worshippers even if they were millions of miles away. If a worshipper died in an accident, the waymark would automatically turn into a channel and send the worshipper's soul into the god's divine kingdom. This process was spontaneous and could not be interfered with. If someone intercepted the worshipper's soul, it would easily attract the attention of the god. Under normal circumstances, no one would be willing to provoke the high and mighty gods for the sake of a worshipper's soul. However, there were many times when it was necessary to silence the worshipper's soul. Although Grim had no intention of silencing the dragon lich, the fact that the dragon lich's soul contained a waymark of faith shocked him, and he found it inconceivable. After all, the dragon lich was a creature that had transcended the realm of living beings and was an undead creature through and through. Such a taboo was not allowed even within the dragon clan. Under normal circumstances, large dragon tombs were usually guarded and managed by the dragons, appointed by the dragon clan. The interior of the tombs would also have dragon spells set up to prevent undead dragons from appearing. Only those neglected or abandoned dragon tombs could give birth to dragon tomb guards or dragon liches, such as the undead dragon clan. Since there was even a dragon lich in this tomb, it must have been abandoned by the dragon clan. But if that was the case, how could the waymark of faith in the dragon lich's soul be explained? Could it be that the dragon clan could accept the power of faith of an undead dragon? Strange, evil, and inexplicable. Evil Magus, just wait to suffer the wrath of the dragon clan. Sinclair won't let you go. Although the Dracolic had lost its ability to resist, it was still cursing loudly with its green eyes. Grim was slightly taken aback when he heard the name that the Dracolic mentioned. Sinclair. That name sounded familiar. That's right, this was the powerful female dragon that had sworn to follow the Dragon of Night, Farazer. She was also one of the famous evil dragons in the multiverse. If she was the Dragon Lich's backer, then everything made sense. However, just as Grim was pondering silently, the AI chip's urgent prompt sounded in his mind. Beep. Strange spatial positioning signal detected. Signal source. Dragon Bone Altar. What? Hearing this news, Grim's heart tightened. He raised his right hand and instantly condensed a huge amount of flame energy. With a bang, he slammed it onto the small dragon bone altar. With a crisp crack, the dragon bone altar collapsed. The shattered dragon bones fell to the ground, revealing a small and exquisite mysterious formation of light. White light flickered within the formation, and according to some mysterious pattern, it was sending an unknown signal to a certain place in the void. Grimm's eyes sharpened and he snorted angrily. "How dare you play this kind of trick right under my nose?" Having said this, Grimm stretched out his large hand. Blazing red flames instantly ignited on it, and he viciously grabbed at the mysterious formation of light. However, unexpectedly, the large flaming hand grabbed nothing but air. It was as if the formation of light was just an illusion without a physical body. The large flaming hand tossed and turned many times, but it was unable to damage it in the slightest. Was the formation of light really an illusion? Grimm was the first to not believe it, because the mysterious signal that the AI chip had sensed was real. This meant that this strange formation of light had a unique spatial characteristic. It seemed to be within the space of the dragon's tomb, but in reality, it was located in a completely different space. As for how the other party managed to project him into this space, Grimm had no idea either, and it was difficult for him to figure it out. AI chip, can you find the true location of the formation of light? Grimm could not help but order the AI chip. Beep, this is a special spatial layer usage technique. The light formation isn't located in any alternate space, but between two adjacent spaces. Without a specific method of communication, it's impossible to find the spatial location of the light formation. Communication method. Grimm turned to look at the dragon lich, who was still cursing incessantly, and naturally knew that there was a method of communication hidden in its mind. However, time was of the essence. Even if he used the soul-searching spell to force it, the chances of obtaining the memory fragments that he wanted was less than 20%. Hence, Grimm's brows furrowed, and he asked coldly, "Is there no other way to touch this formation of light?" "Yes, the power of laws. Since the formation of light has been projected into this plane, it definitely has a special method of communication with the power of laws here. Ordinary methods might not be able to touch it, but the power of laws will definitely be able to touch it." "The power of laws? You should have said so earlier." Grimm was overjoyed. The flaming hand that had reached into the formation of light suddenly retracted its brilliance, and the terrifying heat was quickly replaced by a transparent golden flame. Inextinguishable flames covered Grimm's palm, and transparent threads of energy began to silently affect the surrounding void. As expected, the law of flames vibrated, and the mysterious formation of light began to tremble. Analyzing the frequency of the undulations of laws. Estimated time of completion, 7 minutes 25 seconds. Beep. Warning, warning. Signs of the descent of a mysterious will. Estimated time of arrival, 5 minutes 36 seconds. Two pieces of information entered Grimm's mind at the same time. The first made him happy, while the second made him shocked. Descent, bastard, no wonder the dragon lich was so stubborn. It had been acting as a spatial beacon all along, guiding the mysterious will from the other side to descend here. Grimm made up his mind, and the power of his right hand that was inserted into the formation increased once again. Violent and ferocious law of flames surged into the strange spatial singularity at the center of the formation of light, wanting to destroy it in one fell swoop. Without this spatial singularity, the other party would lose the ability to locate him. If it wanted to extend its will across millions of miles of the endless sea of stars, it would have to wait until it became the master of this space. However, the mysterious will on the other side of the formation of light seemed to have sensed Grimm's actions, and an extremely terrifying dragon aura surged through the void into his consciousness. "Stop it, arrogant bastard! You can't destroy the spatial waymark that I've set up. I'll give you a few minutes to escape. When I get there, I'll definitely teach you a lesson." With such a powerful dragon aura, Grimm was certain that the person on the other side of the formation of light was Sinclair, the dragon Lich had mentioned. It was said that this evil little female dragon was a terrifying existence at rank 6. I'm saying if she used the spatial waymark to appear in this plane, none of the Magi here would have a good time. Even a great magus like Grimm would find it difficult to escape unscathed. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.